As our protagonist plummets from a building, he flashes back to his lonely past in an orphanage where he hit the books hard to finally become a prosecutor. He fought tooth and nail to get to this position and dedicated his entire life to seeking justice. But reality turned out to be much different and much crueler. He remembers his boss treating him like dirt, asking if he really needs to test something to know it's wrong. Despite this, he tells prosecutor Seo Jun Jaeyoung to listen closely. However, the man asks who he thinks pays the taxes that fund his salary, telling him his true masters aren't the common folk. He says that even a dog doesn't bite the hand that feeds it and tells him to bury the case. Our protagonist clenches his fist and asks if paying a lot of taxes gives someone the right to commit crimes. He tells his boss to let him know who wrote that law, because he'll make sure that person gets nabbed too. But on that day, the prosecutor just called him arrogant and told him not to do anything he might regret. In that moment, he finally realized he had messed with the wrong people, because in no time, they gathered people to completely ruin his life. Yet despite everything, Seo Jun Jaeyoung has only one regret. His only regret is having to leave this world without being able to lock up scumbags like that man. Completely broken and on the verge of the end, he wonders if this is how it all concludes in such a useless way. With his last breaths, he can only think of one thing. He wished he had just a little more time to get his revenge. As the ambulance arrives to get him, the medics try to do something to save him. A moment later, he wakes up in a hospital. He realizes he hadn't checked out. Seo Jun Jaeyoung sits up in bed, unable to believe he survived a fall from that height. He then gets excited because he's been given a new lease on life. After all, he got the time he desperately wanted to hunt down everyone who betrayed him, and it doesn't matter that he's now seen as a suspect accused of a crime he didn't commit. The fact that he's alive will be his enemy's worst nightmare, and he has no time to waste. So, he decides to get out of that place immediately. However, upon touching his face, he feels something strange. Seeing his own reflection, he panics, wondering who that person is, and to make matters worse, his voice has also completely changed, leaving him even more confused. Desperate, he starts smacking himself, believing it's all just a dream. However, he drops to his knees in a lot of pain and wonders how a dream can feel so real. He then thinks that if this is a dream, he needs to wake up now, because his real self is out there, fading away. Since slapping himself didn't work, he concludes there's only one last way to wake up from this supposed dream. At that exact moment, his room door opens. A couple enters, calling him Seo Jin and asking if he's finally awake. However, at that moment, our protagonist was trying to jump out the window. Interrupted, he asks who they are, leaving them stunned. Faced with all this, he finally understands that something defying all logic has happened. From then on, he decides to accept his new identity as Kim Seo Jin and pretend he has amnesia to explain his behavior. The young man's parents are worried about his attempt to jump, but the doctor calms them down, stating it's a temporary effect of the accident. In the beginning, everything was very strange for our protagonist. He insisted he wasn't Kim Seo Jin, and because of that, he ended up being dragged to a shaman. There, the shaman claims there's a departed person inside him. This leaves our guy in shock, and he wonders if this woman actually knows what's going on. However, the shaman says a female spirit is playing tricks and needs to be exorcised, which makes our protagonist realize she's a complete fraud. But after the initial chaos of being reborn as Kim Seo Jin, he slowly began to adapt to the new body over the course of 3 weeks. Meanwhile, a news report on TV informs that prosecutor Seo Jun Jaeyoung, who was on the run after accusations of sexual assault, has been found. After jumping from a building, he was left brain dead and eventually passed away. With that, our protagonist accepts that he is truly gone. In this way, he understands that from now on, he will have to live as Kim Seo Jin. Shortly after, the young man goes to have breakfast with his new family. Arriving at the table, he greets his father, who is happy to see that Seo Jin is awake. He then realizes that unlike his lonely life as an orphan, he now has a complete family. His new father is Kim Jun Man, a man who, to be honest, he would have hated in his past life. He's the CEO of a construction company that bribes prosecutors without batting an eye. Despite this, our protagonist thinks there's nothing he can do about it. That man is his father now, and he seems to be dedicated to his family. Just then, his mother, Oh Mi Jung, appears, complaining about the smell of alcohol and asking if her husband went out drinking again. She's a classy woman who's never washed a dish in her life and believes anything from France is automatically superior. A little later, his younger brother, Kim Jin Young, who dreams of being a chef, joins them at the table. However, for our protagonist, it's strange to suddenly have a family. But the weirdest thing of all is being in this body. He discovers that, coincidentally, he is also a prosecutor in training who fell from the 5th floor of an apartment building. With this, he wonders if it was some kind of cosmic joke, and since he doesn't have the original owner's memories, he has no idea why he fell. But regardless of whether it's a divine joke or not, he's been given a second chance and won't let it end as uselessly as his previous life. And now, looking at his reflection in the soup, he realizes that if he uses all the resources at his disposal, he can finally get his revenge on Chief Prosecutor Kim Young-jun. At that moment, his father asks if Seo Jin is going back to work tomorrow, and our protagonist confirms. His father suggests he rest a bit more, but our protagonist says he's rested enough and needs to work to make up for lost time. At this, his father suggests inviting their uncle over for dinner, and the protagonist's brother's reaction is anything but good. After they finish dinner, Jin Young goes to find the protagonist and asks his brother to say goodbye before he leaves. The boy then explains he made up other plans just to avoid having dinner with their uncle, and the protagonist asks why. Jin Young remembers his brother's amnesia and explains that their uncle is an unbearable guy who acts like he's king of the world, and to top it off, he's always looking down on their family but is quick to ask for money when he's in trouble, and just thinking about it gets him fired up. Our protagonist thinks he'll soon find out what this uncle is really like. Later, while reading in his room, his mother calls out, announcing that his uncle has arrived, and so he gets up, finally about to see the face of this much hated relative. As he walks down the stairs, he thinks that no matter how bad the uncle is, he can't be worse than Kim Young-jun, and upon seeing him, he's completely floored. It's the same scumbag from his dark past. In his eyes, the reflection of his greatest enemy appears. He remembers the man's threatening words, but now, Jun greets him with a fake smile and asks if he's feeling alright. Our protagonist can't believe that Kim Young-jun, the man who got him taken out, is now his uncle. During dinner, the uncle pretends to be concerned, saying he heard about the fall from the building. The scumbag even claims to be happy to know he's okay. Young-jun then asks about the memory loss, and the father confirms the situation. He questions if he'll be able to handle life at the office, but inside, our protagonist is seething with rage at having to look at that man. However, he needs to keep it together for now, and with a forced smile, he replies that it won't be a problem. He says that only his personal information was lost and the rest of his memories are intact, then thinks to himself that he needs this to carry out his ultimate revenge. The uncle then offers to use his influence to transfer him to Seoul after his internship, and his father gets all excited about the idea. Young-jun cuts his steak and asks what he thinks of the proposal. With a fake smile, he says it's fine, but inside, he refuses to be that man's prey again. Despite this, the uncle suddenly changes the subject. He asks if Seo Jin really doesn't remember anything about the accident, but our protagonist denies everything. The uncle pretends to believe him, but his suspicious smile makes our protagonist wary. Back in his room, while packing his things, someone asks if he's finished with everything. This leaves our protagonist thinking about his uncle's strange smile. He then wonders if it was just his imagination. However, someone interrupts him, asking if he's done packing. The person was Kim Yun-hwan, Young-jun's son, who also works as a prosecutor. Our protagonist says he forgot something. Yun-hwan grabs a folder from the box the protagonist was carrying and asks if it's a case he's studying. With a smile on his face, he opens the folder, curious to see the contents. The file reveals a case about a high school teacher, but Seo Jin claims it's not his, and his cousin offers to explain. Seo Jin refuses the help, but his cousin insists and explains that the problem with the case is the lack of evidence to prove coercion. He continues, saying the victim's parents allege the man forced the situation, and meanwhile the uncle watches with a look of contempt. The uncle, with a superior air, says that Seo Jin will gain experience after a few years in the field. However, our protagonist believes it will be difficult to win the case if the charge is assault. With a mocking smile, his cousin asks what he knows about the subject. Seo Jin then explains that it'll be tricky to prove the victim was incapacitated, and besides, the two had already met several times, and to make matters worse, they even exchanged romantic messages. The cousin agrees, saying that's exactly what the defense claims, but he has a plan. However, our protagonist also has an ace up his sleeve. He says that if it were him, he'd use Article 302 of the Penal Code. Seo Jin explains that the man deceived the girl into believing they had a relationship, even though he was married and had no intention of being with her. For that alone, he can be punished under Article 302, and our protagonist asks why they're choosing the harder path. Seeing the scene, the uncle's expression is anything but friendly. The father asks who is right, and the uncle replies that the law can change depending on the point of view, and that both are right. He then places his glass on the table and says they need to leave. As Seo Jin has to prepare for work, the father and mother are surprised but, at the same time, proud of their son's intelligence. The next day, while driving, the father laughs hard, saying he's never seen Young-jun's face so confused in his life, and his son replies that he already said that yesterday. The proud father says his son is the best of all and wishes him a good day at work. Meanwhile, looking at himself in the rearview mirror, our protagonist starts to feel sorry for the original owner of that body. From there, he arrives at his destination, the Dongnam branch of the Gangwon District Public Prosecutor's office. Upon entering the place, he already expected what he would find there. But the atmosphere was even more pathetic than he imagined, with everyone looking disheartened. After all, all, that place was known as the Dongnam Exile, a place where prosecutors who lost their battles against the powerful were sent. He then heads to room 285, Prosecutor Lee Mong-soo's office. That's where the old Kim Seo-jin was learning the ropes as an intern prosecutor. With a slight smile, our protagonist thinks it's good to be wearing a prosecutor's clothes again. Suddenly, a man appears and asks why he's just standing at the door, and the young man immediately recognizes him as Prosecutor Lee Myung-soo. Lee Mong-soo warns him that since he's back, he'd better get ready for his debut and tells him not to embarrass him. Right after, a pile of documents is tossed onto his desk. Ready for action, our protagonist grabs the papers and asks to hear the case summary. The file describes a case where a 40-year-old woman was taken out in a car accident while returning home drunk. Lee Mong-soo calls the case simple and asks if he just lay in bed for 3 weeks before asking for a summary of what happened. Our protagonist analyzes the documents and explains that the prosecution accused the driver of violating his duty of care, but the driver claims it was an unavoidable accident. Lee Mong-soo states that in cases like this, the prosecutor needs to prove the accident could have been avoided, and then asks what the expected sentence would be. Seo-jin responds precisely that if there were a settlement, it would be 1 year in prison with 2 years of probation, but since the victim's family wants a severe punishment, he expects about a year behind bars. Surprised by the answer, Lee Mong-soo gets annoyed and sarcastically asks if he had private lessons with his uncle for 3 weeks. He doesn't like how smooth talking the rookie is at all, and since he can't find anything to criticize, he decides to ask if the young man has been to the crime scene. Seo-jin is a bit confused by the question but confirms he hasn't been to the location yet. At this, Lee Mong-soo explodes with anger and yells that rookies need to go investigate in person and that the court is not a joke. He then tells the young man to get out of there and go to the accident scene immediately. A short time later, our protagonist is on the side of the road, complaining about being sent to the crime scene in his first hour of work. Despite this, he gives a wry smile as he was eager for some action, and this came in handy. Looking at the road, he recalls the case details. The driver was at the speed limit of 80 kilometers per hour on a sharp curve. He then wonders how anyone could possibly take that curve at 80 kilometers per hour. Crouching on the ground, he observes the wreckage and thinks that anyone would slow down on a curve like that. Suddenly, upon touching one of the car pieces, his eyes begin to glow intensely. He holds a piece of the broken side mirror, and a strange energy emanates from the object. Suddenly, he has a vision of a woman saying that he's the only one she can ask for help. The scene continues inside a car, where a man corrects the woman, stating that this is a business deal, and agrees to give her 200 million. However, the person finds the amount low and asks for 300 million to also cover the lawyer's fees. The man then agrees to the amount, and the other person says they will gladly accept the 300 million. Back in the present, our protagonist feels exhausted and wonders if that was all that happened. He then understands that since his reincarnation, he can see the past of objects he touches, like some kind of psychometry. Seo-jin questions if the vision is related to the current case and regrets not being able to see the people's faces. The words from the vision echo in his mind a favor in exchange for 300 million. With this, a suspicion arises, and he starts to think that maybe this wasn't just a simple car accident. Crouching, he wonders if there are more memories but knows he can't just access them whenever he wants. Suddenly, someone calls his name, and the young man turns around. Surprised, it was his colleagues Shin Jong-sung and Lee So-hee, who ask what he's doing there. With a slightly awkward smile, our protagonist turns to them. Holding the piece of the side mirror, he stands up and says he was just taking a look at the crime scene, while thinking that he needs to be careful not to make them think he's crazy. Shin Jong-sung greets him and asks where he got hurt, as not even Yoon-won knows the details. Seo-jin simply replies that he got banged up a little here and there. He then asks what his colleagues are doing there, and Jong-sung complains that they were kicked out of the office just because he was coming to the crime scene. The guy is annoyed at having to supervise the debut of someone with good connections, because for the exiled prosecutors, it's a huge pain. Despite this, he just says to get it over with, as he heard it was a simple traffic accident. Our protagonist dismisses the two and suggests they wait at a nearby cafe, saying he'll call when he's heading back. With a furious look, Jong-sung clenches his teeth, but Seo-jin reaffirms that he has things to check. Out of patience, the colleague places a hand on his shoulder, getting his attention. Jong-sung asks if he didn't hear what was said, and our protagonist wonders what this guy's problem is. Freaking out all of a sudden, their colleague just watches the situation unfold, not quite understanding. Seo-jin lets out a sigh and gives a slight smirk. He then removes the colleague's hand from his shoulder and pats him on the head, telling him to go on ahead if he's not interested. As the case is, the guy is shocked and calls him a psycho, but Seo-jin has no intention of obeying him like the body's previous owner did. Jong-sung reveals that the lawyer on the other side of the case is a friend of his father's, and that's Seo. Jin used to beg for a little help. Our protagonist scoffs at the situation and asks if he's being threatened with daddy's friend, a prosecutor in his 30s. With a smile, he pinches his colleague's cheek and tells him to let his so-called friend know when he gets home. With a mocking smile, he tells his coworker to ask daddy's friend to scold the mean Kim Seo Jin. Completely furious, Jong Sung grabs him by the collar and asks who he thinks he is. At that moment, their colleague Lee So, he steps in and says that's enough. She says she'll wait a nearby cafe and tells Seo Jin to call when he's done, and Jong Sung follows her, completely irritated. Before leaving, the guy threatens our protagonist, telling him to just wait for what's coming. In the car, he says he needs to call Yoon Hwan, the chief prosecutor's son. Meanwhile, the girl wonders what's gotten into Seo Jin to be acting so differently and calls Yoon Hwan to ask if he hit his head. She always thought he was just a guy who liked to show off because of his rich parents, but now she questions if she was wrong. Despite this, she believes his new attitude won't last long. Alone again at the crime scene, our protagonist becomes thoughtful. He wonders why the old Kim Seo Jin hung out with a guy like that and how he got along with Kim Yoon Hwan too. From the information he's gathered, the original Seo Jin was a serious person who knew how to judge situations and didn't seem to fit in with those two. But he decides to put that aside for now and finish looking at the accident scene. Suddenly, an old woman approaches and warns him that it's dangerous to stand there. He introduces himself as an investigator, and the woman asks if there's still anything to investigate. The woman comments that poor Soo Jaeyoung was the only one who suffered, and our protagonist realizes she knew the deceased. She confirms, saying she owns a nearby supermarket and knew the victim since school, describing her as a kind child and a good mother. The elderly woman then complains that some guy named Jang Dong-ik moved away a long time ago and now came back to cause all this trouble, and Seo Jin deduces she's talking about the driver. With this information, he connects the dots and realizes the man in his vision is probably Jang Dong-ik, and the woman was the victim's sister. He then asks if the driver was close to the victim's family, and the woman replies that yes, they were all from the same neighborhood. Our protagonist becomes even more intrigued by the situation. Shortly after, he calls an officer named Jang. He asks him to investigate the financial situation of the bereaved family and the perpetrator, with a special focus on debts and the call records of the victim's sister. While driving, he feels like the pieces of the puzzle are starting to fall into place. He reviews the case details and discovers that the victim, Woo-soo Jaeyoung, 41 years old, had been separated from her husband for 7 years. She worked day and night to raise her 2 children alone. On the day of the incident, there was a staff dinner at the restaurant where she worked. The accident happened while she was walking home alone. Intrigued by the details, he decides to investigate further and goes to the restaurant to ask if the dinner was a last-minute thing. The owner, Kim Oh-sung, explains that it wasn't, as everyone has families and dinners are always announced in advance. Our protagonist continues the conversation and asks about the taxi money the owner gave the victim. The man replies that he gave her 100,000 won, and Seo Jin finds that a lot for a taxi ride, especially since the distance was short. He then explains that the victim was the type to walk everywhere to save money, and that the money was actually for her kids. Despite this, the owner says he forced her into a taxi because it was already very late. However, he saw the woman getting out of the car just after turning the corner. The man laments that if she had taken the taxi, she would still be alive, and our protagonist notes that the dinner was announced in advance and that the victim walked back. With this, he concludes that if someone planned the crime, it wouldn't have been hard to predict the time and place. Back in his car, Seo Jin analyzes the file of the victim's sister, Woo-soo Jin, a 45-year-old single woman. She owns a small, struggling restaurant and got involved with loan sharks, accumulating a debt of 120 million won. Next, he investigates the perpetrator, Jang Dong-ik, and discovers he graduated from the same school as the victim's sister. The young man also finds out he has prior convictions, was recently released, and has a debt of 30 million won. Although there's no proof of direct contact, he believes they could have easily met in the small neighborhood. But the key piece of the puzzle is that the victim took out a life insurance policy 1 year and 3 months ago with a payout of 1 billion won. He then checks who the beneficiary of the insurance would be, and to his surprise, the beneficiary was the victim's sister, Woo-soo Jin, which practically solves the case. Meanwhile, outside the building, someone calls Lee Mang-soo, warning him that his opponent this time is one of his juniors. Lee Mang-soo replies not to worry about how he trains his staff and hangs up the phone. Back in his office, he asks Kim Seo Jin if he's ready for the first summons, and our protagonist confirms he's checked everything. Thus, his boss warns him not to be intimidated, as the opposing lawyer is a former senior prosecutor, and tells him to crush the man's spirit. Our protagonist then says his goodbyes, but Lee Myung-soo feels something strange is happening today. Because of this, he gets the young man's attention before he leaves the room. With a serious look, he warns him not to make any mistakes and to do a good Good job, Seo. Jin just agrees but keeps thinking about his boss's warning. Right after the young man leaves, Lee Mong-soo rushes to the window to watch something outside. He then spots a man named Gusang Jin. The man walks toward a black car waiting for him in the parking lot. As he gets close to the vehicle, someone greets him, asking if he's finally here. It was the case's lawyer who, with a smile on his face, says he won't lose to people like them. Meanwhile, Lee Mong-soo continues to watch the scene from his window. The lawyer comments that the fresh air did Sang Jin good, but the young man replies that he just wants to go back to Seoul. Gusang Jin then asks what the prosecutor he's up against is like, and the lawyer responds with disdain that he's nothing special, just a rookie. The former senior prosecutor adds that he's a bit arrogant and asks Sang Jin to understand, as the young man's father is the head of Daejeon Construction. With that, he states that the rookie needs to be crushed to learn to fear the law and sarcastically asks the man to go easy on him. At this, the lawyer suggests they grab a bite to eat when it's all over, and Gusang Jin agrees, saying goodbye. Alone, the man is furious, remembering how Kim Seo Jin dared to insult him, and vows to ensure the young man is humiliated. The scene then shifts to interrogation room number 302. Inside, our protagonist is with the suspects when the opposing lawyer enters, boasting about being from the best law firm in South Korea, with an overwhelming win rate. The man introduces himself as veteran lawyer Gusang Jin while showing his business card. Our protagonist takes the card, and Gusang Jin threatens him, saying he can fight all he wants, but his first trial will be his downfall. Right after, the lawyer mockingly asks Seo Jin his age, and the young man replies that if he knows it's rude, he shouldn't ask. Gusang Jin gives a fake smile and apologizes, saying he was just curious before suggesting they get straight to the point. He then starts giving examples of unavoidable accidents, like someone coming out of an alley or a bicycle coming the wrong way. The lawyer claims this case is the same and asks Seo Jin to be rational, but our protagonist interrupts him, telling him to wait. Kim Seo Jin then says he'd first like to ask Mr. Jang Dong-ik something. The driver looks at his lawyer, unsure what to do, and Gusang Jin, with a confident smile, says to hear what the young prosecutor wants to know. With a serious look, our protagonist tells him to go ahead, and starts by asking Jang Dong-ik about his debts. Seo Jin continues, questioning where the man got the money to pay the expensive lawyer's fees, and Gusang Jin gets annoyed, calling the prosecutor's attention. With a mocking smile, our protagonist apologizes if he upset him, as he was just curious. This enrages the lawyer, who wonders how this arrogant brat dares to act like that in front of a veteran like him. Our guy just stares at him calmly, and thinks he'll see how long the man's composure lasts. He then turns his attention back to Jang Dong-ik and asks if he graduated from Dongnam Elementary School, and the man confirms, somewhat confused. So, Seo Jin gets straight to the point and asks if he knows Woo Soo Jin, the victim's older sister, which leaves the man completely shocked. Gusang Jin immediately tells Jang Dong-ik not to answer, and he obeys in silence. At this, our protagonist reveals that the insurance beneficiary is the victim's sister, and the lawyer explodes with anger, asking what that has to do with the accident. The young man then states that he has determined there's a possibility that this was not a simple traffic accident. Jang Dong-ik starts to break out in a cold sweat, completely terrified by the revelation. The lawyer yells that he shouldn't talk about possibilities, and should bring concrete proof. Our protagonist gives a slight smirk at the situation. From there, he claims that of course he has proof too and turns his laptop towards them. Seeing what's on the screen, Jang Dong-ik becomes even more terrified. The screen shows a recording of Jang Dong-ik in a coffee shop, and our protagonist asks if he was there, near the victim's workplace, on the day of the incident. Gusang Jin scoffs at the evidence and questions if that's just tracking his client's whereabouts and if everyone in the coffee shop is also a suspect. The lawyer then boasts of having 15 years of experience in the field and claims he can see exactly what the prosecutor is thinking. He says the young man seems to suspect his client conspired with the victim's sister for a contract hit. With a furious look, he threatens our protagonist not disturb a grieving family unless he wants his name dragged through the media. He then suggests that Seo Jin either get some solid proof or that they just discuss the traffic accident quietly. However, our guy interrupts him and says the counselor is getting something wrong, while thinking that to the lawyer, he's just a rookie. The young man's confidence catches Gusang Jin off guard, leaving the man visibly shocked. Kim Seo Jin then reaffirms his position, saying he's the one filing the charges and he doesn't need the lawyer's permission for every step of the process. Gusang Jin clenches his fist, completely shocked, and wonders if this punk is really a rookie. He can't understand where all that calm and composure, usually only seen in a veteran, is coming from. Because of this, he turns to Jang Dong-ik and whispers for him to keep his mouth shut, as they can't show any weakness and need to stay on the defensive. Our protagonist then starts quoting the conversation he saw with his ability, saying that 200 million is a bit low. Jang Dong-ik is terrified to hear the exact words of the 300 million won negotiation, with lawyer's fees included, and wonders how he knows that. Kim Seo Jin makes a gesture with his hand and asks if what he just said doesn't sound very familiar to the suspect. Completely desperate, Jang Dong-ik stands up and yells yells that he didn't harm the woman, repeating the same phrase over and over. Our protagonist just stares at him with a mocking look and asks, "Is that so?" while tapping his finger on the keyboard. He then turns the laptop once more and questions who the man called right after the accident. The driver is completely confused and tries to remember if it was police, the insurance company, or emergency services, but Seo Jin points out that according to the records, he called 911 immediately. At this, the young man reveals the major inconsistency. The dashcam recording shows the call being made at 1:40 in the morning, but the fire department only received the report at 1:46. With a smirk, he then asks if the call signal lasted for 6 minutes. The lawyer tries to defend himself, saying many people don't sync their dashcam times and that this is a stretch, but our protagonist counters by asking about another call made 6 minutes after the first one. The recording shows Jang Dong standing next to the body, and he claims it was just a coincidence, but Seo Jin denies it. Our guy then reveals the truth, saying that at 1:40 in the morning, he called Woo Soo Jin, the victim's sister. The final accusation is made, and the young man states that the driver made the call while waiting for the woman to stop breathing, leaving Jang Dong completely shattered. On the other side of the glass, Shin Jong Sung watches everything, completely shocked, and calls our protagonist a maniac upon realizing it was a murder case. Desperate, he grabs his phone and starts looking for his superior's contact in his list. He then calls Lee Mong-soo, the chief prosecutor, and tells him he needs to come down there for a moment. The news spreads quickly through the office, and someone is shocked to learn it was a contract hit ordered by the victim's own sister. A short time later, Lee Mong-soo arrives on the scene and wonders how a rookie managed to unravel all that on his own. On the other side, Lee Mong-soo watches everything and says that Kim Seo Jin isn't half bad, as Gu Sang Jin has finally met his match. He then turns to his subordinate and asks if it's okay to write a little script. With a smile on his face, he comments that their branch has been quiet for too long and it wouldn't be a bad thing to make some noise every now and then. The chief prosecutor then asks if that's all he has to say, and reveals with a smile that Gu Sang Jin is a classmate of his, thus, he wants to take the opportunity to tarnish that arrogant man's reputation. Meanwhile, Kim Yoon Won and Lee So he walk down the hall, and he asks if she knows today is Seo Jin's first investigation. The young man didn't know it would be today, but believes his cousin will have a tough time since his opponent is Gu Sang Jin himself. With a smug smile, he finds it unlikely that a rookie will beat the lawyer and thinks Seo Jin will probably be humiliated in court. Right after, they overhear some reporters commenting that Gu Sang Jin must have been paid very well, as he would defend the devil himself if the money was good. Yoon Hwan gets annoyed with the rumors but is shocked to hear the reporters say that the famous lawyer is getting schooled in the argument. They comment that the rookie prosecutor must be someone special, as he isn't losing on any point and the source of the information is reliable. At this, our protagonist's cousin is completely confused and wonders who is getting schooled by whom here. Suddenly, the interrogation room door opens and Jang Dong is dragged out, yelling for them to let him go. He keeps shouting that he's innocent and that the lawyer should defend him properly, but our protagonist just watches him with his arms crossed and asks if he's leaving already. With a victorious smile, our protagonist asks if he wants to keep this up. At this, Gu Sang Jin explodes with rage and yells that he's off the case, as he thought it was just a simple traffic accident. As the defeated lawyer walks away, Seo Jin simply tells them to get out of there, but before leaving, Gu Sang Jin turns and threatens him, telling him to watch his manners, as he's seen plenty of guys like him lose their jobs. The lawyer then leaves and our protagonist just watches him from a distance, unfazed. The scene reminds Seo Jin of his old boss, who once asked him why he worked so hard. The man advised him to humble himself to succeed, because the more he worked, the more he'd be seen as an easy target, and he even told the young man to shout that he loved the congressman if he wanted to climb the ladder. Our protagonist thinks that man's face is just as unpleasant now as it was back then. From there, he returns to the investigation room, thinking he'll soon get rid of Gu Sang Jin too. Hiding in the hallway, Kim Yoon Won watches everything, completely shocked by the scene. His cousin can't believe what just happened and thinks the guy has completely changed. Lee So he approaches and asks if, even to his eyes, Kim Seo Jin seems like a different person now. Yoon Won is speechless and just mumbles something under his breath, completely frustrated with the situation. He simply can't understand what the heck is going on in that place. Back in his office, our protagonist's cell phone starts to ring. On the other end of the line is investigator Lee Myung-soo, and Seo Jin answers the call. The man congratulates him on a job well done and invites him out for a meal. A short time later, they arrive at a traditional restaurant that's open 24 hours. At the table, his boss pours him some water and asks why he didn't tell him the case had been flipped. Our protagonist apologizes, but his boss tells him to forget it, as he thinks he knows the reason. However, the man is curious and asks how he managed to turn a simple traffic accident into a murder case. With a smile, our protagonist jokes that he saw everything with his psychometry. He then thinks they'd treat him like a crazy person if he told the truth and explains that he found some strange clues and decided to investigate further. Lee Mong-soo praises him and tells him to keep it up, as one needs to see the whole forest, not just the trees, and Seo Jin notices his boss's attitude has completely changed. Our guy thinks maybe it's because he humiliated Gu Sang-jin, but he definitely seems more favorable to him after the interrogation. The waitress then serves a double portion of soup to celebrate, and our protagonist wonders if this is a new form of bullying to finish him off with food. His boss then asks if he wants to take the case to trial, and Seo Jin confirms, leaving the man surprised, as he didn't expect a rookie to want to handle the trial too. The man warns him that Gu Sang-jin will fight with everything he's got, but our protagonist reveals the lawyer said he wouldn't take the case anymore. With a sly smile, Lee Mong-soo states that's not true, as he will be coming back to the case. Lee Mong-soo explains with a wicked grin that he's throwing a bucket of cold water on Gu Sang-jin's life and that the lawyer is probably feeling miserable right now. Elsewhere, Gu Sang-jin answers his phone, completely shocked, and asks the reporter who told him that. On the other end of the line, the journalist says that as a reporter, he can't reveal his source, and even taunts him, saying he heard he was crushed by a rookie prosecutor. The man continues the taunt, stating he heard the lawyer wasn't going to take the case because he thought he would lose, and Gu Sang-jin becomes furious, telling him to listen carefully. Completely irritated, the lawyer threatens him, telling him not to dare write a single word about what he just heard, or he won't leave the newspaper in one piece. However, Gu Sang-jin is terrified and stammers, asking if the man has already posted the article. The reporter apologizes, saying he didn't post the part about him losing to a rookie, but that he has already published the information about him taking the murder case. Gu Sang-jin then sees the news on his phone with the headline stating that famous lawyer Gu Sang-jin has taken on the Dongnam gun murder case. The man is furious because the news has already spread too fast, and now he has no way to escape the case. His phone starts receiving multiple notifications, and he wonders if the news spread so quickly because it's a controversial topic, or if someone did it on purpose. Several people comment, praising the lawyer, and he realizes he can no longer escape the situation. Completely cornered, the man slams his fist on the table, totally frustrated. The scene then shifts to the JTJ office, where a superior says that Gu Sang-jin sure made a lot of noise. The lawyer apologizes to his boss while looking at the news on the computer. However, the superior says there's nothing to apologize for, as he doesn't care if Gu Sang-jin defends even a stray dog. Jang Taek-jun, the CEO of JTJ law firm, turns to Gu Sang-jin and warns that he will not forgive a loss. He then begins to dictate the strategy for the lawyer, telling him to portray the older sister as a pitiful figure. The plan gets even dirtier when the boss tells him to turn the deceased into someone who deserved what happened and paint the prosecutor as a demon. Jang Taek-jun explains that if he does this, the public's heart will sway and the judges will feel the pressure, as the real legal battle comes after that. The man reminds him that clients don't care about their morality, but whether they are competent or not. With a threatening look, he orders Gu Sang-jin to win at any cost, because if he can't win a trivial fight like this, there will be no place for him in the company anymore. Completely pressured, the lawyer just clenches his fist, signaling that he has accepted the mission. A short time later, the scene shifts to a crowd of reporters, with camera flashes going off everywhere. They immediately surround Gu Sang-jin and bombard him with questions about the case and the rumors that he takes any job for money. The lawyer then begins his show, asking on what evidence they are accusing a grieving family member of being a murderer. A female reporter questions if he is claiming she is innocent and what the reason for that would be. Gu Sang-jin then states that it's all just allegations from the prosecution and that no fingerprints were found in the murder case. At this, he asks the reporters to remember the principle of presumption of innocence. He finishes his speech by blaming the prosecution and the media for already labeling the woman as a murderer before the first trial even began. To finish his show, the lawyer bows deeply and begs the reporters to have some restraint. However, inside, his gaze is cold and calculating, as it's all just a big performance to manipulate the media. His plan works perfectly, and soon the newspapers are filled with headlines favorable to his client, with the lawyer posing as a hero. In the prison visiting room, the man assures Woo-soo-jin that he will be able to prove her innocence. However, he has one condition and in return demands half of the life insurance money. The lawyer then pressures her and asks the woman to tell him the whole truth about what happened. As he is on her side, he states that this is the only way to get her out of that situation. Completely defeated, the woman confesses that she did everything to pay off her debts, as the pressure was driving her crazy. In a flashback, she remembers when her sister told her about the life insurance and made her the sole beneficiary so she could take care of the children if anything happened. Woo-soo-jin admits that she went crazy for a moment upon seeing the opportunity in front of her. Despite this, she tries to justify herself, saying she was going to take care of her nieces, and that she only wanted to use the money to give them a better life. The woman then breaks down in tears and asks for her late sister's forgiveness, completely regretful. Gu Sang-jin just watches the scene with a cold gaze, showing no emotion. The woman covers her face, still crying, but a doubt arises in her mind. With a glimmer of hope in her eyes, she asks if he can really get her declared declared innocent. With a confident smile, Gusang Jin assures the woman that she doesn't need to worry about a thing. From there, someone's cell phone shows several news articles that paint the prosecutor as a villain promoting a witch hunt. Our protagonist observes the news while drinking his coffee and acknowledges that the JTJ law firm is very quick to manipulate public opinion. He then sets down his mug, knowing that such dirty tricks won't be able to hide the truth for long. With a look full of determination, the young man vows to destroy all their lies in today's trial. A short time later, while in the elevator, he receives a call from his younger brother Jin. Young, the boy asks if CO Jin ran into a guy named Jung Woo on his way, but our protagonist is confused as he doesn't know who he's talking about. The younger brother reminds him that he mentioned him before, and the young man recalls that Lee Jung Woo is an old high school friend of Kim Seo Jin who now works for the Dongnam police. Kim Seo Jin confirms he remembers and asks the reason for the call, and the boy tells him he ran into him yesterday and told him about the accident. Jin Young complains that because of that, the officer dragged him to the accident scene and made him stay there until 2 in the morning before leaving to meet Seo Jin. So, he warns his brother not to be startled if Jung Woo shows up out of nowhere and wishes him a good day at work. The exact moment he steps out of the elevator, a man calls his name and waves in his direction. Our guy is a little surprised but soon identifies the man as Lee Jung Woo. The officer approaches and asks how he remembers him, even with the amnesia, and our protagonist says he vaguely remembers his face while hoping he's not another idiot like Shen Jong Sung. Right after Lee Jung Woo grabs his shoulder in a very cheerful and friendly manner. With a serious look, Jung Woo grabs him and promises he will definitely find the jerk who pushed him from the 5th floor. Our protagonist then questions how he knows he was pushed, and the officer replies that it's his detective's instinct, as the location was perfect for it. At this, Seo Jin reflects on the case and agrees it was all very strange since the cameras recorded nothing and there's no record of who called for emergency services. Because of this, he decides to investigate further later and tells his friend to get in the car as he has a trial in the morning. Thus, the two get into the vehicle and prepare to go to the courthouse. Inside the car, Jung Woo finds his friend's behavior strange and asks why he's so serious and not making any jokes. The officer also comments that he's not even listening to his favorite girl group songs, and the protagonist confirms he really doesn't remember anything. With a mischievous smile, the friend tries to take advantage and asks if he also doesn't remember borrowing 300,000 won, but Seo Jin replies that he remembers not borrowing anything. Jung Woo then tries his luck again and asks about the bicycle, but our guy once again states that he remembers denying the request. The officer bursts out laughing and says that in the end, his friend remembers everything. Our protagonist gives a slight smile and thinks that fortunately, the old Kim Seo Jin had a good friend. Suddenly, Jung Woo's phone starts to ring, and he answers the call. He thanks Detective Park for his work and asks if there are any new developments in the Woo-soo Jin case. Upon hearing the mention of the victim Woo-soo Kyung's cell phone, our protagonist feels something strange, and his hearing becomes sharp. His psychometry is suddenly activated, and he has a vision of a high place, wondering why this is happening now. Jung Woo's scream echoes as our protagonist momentarily loses control of the car, skidding dangerously on the road. A short while later, inside the courtroom, the atmosphere is one of anticipation, and in the audience, some wonder if the prosecution is just bluffing. As the defense attorney claimed, 2 men in the audience comment that since it's the prosecutor's first case, it will be very difficult for a rookie to beat a veteran like Gusang Jin. One of them even suggests that our guy might have fabricated a murder case from a simple accident just to pass himself off as a great detective. Right after, the man walks toward his seat with an air of superiority, ready to watch what he believes will be a failure. As he turns to the entrance, he thinks with disdain that the rookie prosecutor is just setting himself up for a major embarrassment. At that exact moment, our protagonist enters the courtroom carrying a box of evidence, and his serious and confident posture surprises everyone in the room. The same man who doubted him is shocked by the young man's dignity, finding it hard to believe that until recently, he was just an intern. From there, he begins to rethink his opinion and comments to his colleague next to him that if things go wrong, it might be Gusang Jin who ends up being humiliated. Kim Seo Jin then sits in his place and begins to organize the documents from the box, preparing for the legal battle to come. Looking around the hall, he notices that the opposing lawyer has not yet arrived. Faced with the situation, our guy reflects on sitting in that prosecutor's chair once again in his life. With his hands on the files, he thinks about his recovered life and everything that is at stake in that decisive moment. Shortly after, the judges enter the courtroom, and the trial of Woo-soo Jin's case finally begins. Our protagonist remembers his past life and vows that this time he will not take things passively, as he plans to completely destroy his opponents. After the defendant is seated, the judge turns to our protagonist and asks him to present the summary of the indictment. With a confident smile, the young man thinks that now the second act of his life as a prosecutor will finally begin. He then begins the indictment, explaining that the defendant, Woo-soo Jin, conspired with her schoolmate Jang Dong to take her own sister's life and that the two used a cell phone in someone else's name to plan everything. On the other side, the lawyer is furious with the young man's arrogance and whispers to Woo-soo Jin not to tremble and to just deny everything the prosecutor says. Gusung Jin continues the manipulation, saying she needs to live to take care of her nephews, which makes her clench her fists tightly. The woman then convinces herself that she did everything for her nephews and that it was what her sister wanted, and the lawyer agrees with a fake smile. The judge turns to the defendant and asks if she acknowledges the facts of the prosecution's indictment. The woman then raises her head and with a weak voice denies all the accusations. Immediately after, she starts to cry and begs them to believe her, as she would never harm her sister, whom she loves so much. The performance continues and the audience begins to doubt the prosecution, wondering if she was really framed by a rookie wanting to be a hero. Our protagonist just watches the scene with a slight smile, curious to see what happens next. He wonders what the real face behind that mask of shamelessness is, and the judge authorizes him to begin the questioning of the defendant. Our guy then stands up and questions if she knew she was the beneficiary of a 1 billion life insurance policy, and the woman confirms. Kim Seo Jin asks how she found out, and the defendant explains that her sister told her and asked her to take good care of the children if anything happened. Next, he questions her about her debts to loan sharks, and the woman replies that she runs a business and sometimes needs quick cash, but that it's nothing unusual. Our protagonist thinks about how shameless the woman is and questions her about the reason for using a cell phone in someone else's name to contact Jang Dong-ik. The defendant feigns surprise and claims she didn't know that, as Jang Dong-ik gave her the device as a gift so they could communicate, and Seo Jin asks why. With a pitiful expression and in a low voice, she reveals that it was because the two were dating. The young man then presses her, asking if they met at a reunion of former classmates and conspired to commit the crime for the insurance money, but the woman denies everything. At this, she becomes desperate and yells that she already said no, and her lawyer stands up to object, stating that the prosecutor is just embarrassing her with speculation. The judge accepts the objection and asks our protagonist to stick to the objective facts, while the defendant continues to feign being completely shaken. Thus, Kim Seo Jin says he will continue the questioning about the cell phone, and the woman explodes with anger, repeating that she got the device because they were dating. The lawyer tries to intervene once more and starts yelling at the judge to object to the question. However, our guy interrupts him loudly, saying he's not talking about her cell phone. He then reveals that he is actually referring to her sister's cell phone, Woo-soo Kang's. This revelation catches the woman by surprise, leaving her completely speechless and visibly shocked. Our protagonist then drops the bombshell, asking if she knew her sister recorded a diary on her cell phone, and the audience becomes curious about the so-called recording. He shows the device and explains that the deceased was recording at the moment of the incident, and that something other than her voice was registered in the audio. Gusang Jin is completely surprised and wonders what this whole diary recording thing is about. With a victorious look, our protagonist faces the lawyer, who desperately wonders what ace Kim Seo Jin still has up his sleeve. The recording begins with the victim's voice, Woo-soo Jaeong, explaining that her boss gave her money to take a taxi home. She continues, saying that with that money, she could buy Christmas presents for her children, thinking of sneakers for Jiwoong and maybe some slime for Jeongwoong. The woman then wonders if the children's father would show up this time, and that if he did, she would scold him. Then they would eat the cake they all made together. However, she suddenly notices something strange approaching. A car hits her head on, and her cell phone flies out, shattering on the ground. The recording continues, and the voice of the driver, Jang Dong-ik, can be heard approaching the woman's fallen body. The man then says he hit her but she's still breathing, and calls her a tough little thing. Shortly after, Jang Dong-ik's voice is heard again on the phone, asking what he should do if someone sees them. The recording finally ends, and our protagonist is completely in shock with what he just witnessed through his ability. Because of this, he slams on the brakes and his friend Jung Woo screams in fear, asking why he braked like that, while our protagonist wonders how he managed to see everything without touching anything. Sometime after the trial, our guy wakes up in his bed feeling awful and wonders if he drank too much at the celebration dinner the night before. In his office, Lee Mong-soo praises him, saying he hit the first button correctly. Kim Seo Jin drinks some water and thinks that honestly, this time he just got lucky. However, his boss warns him that from now on, he will have to turn luck into skill. Lee Mong-soo also warns that in a week, the new postings will be announced and hopes the young man gets assigned somewhere in the capital area. Suddenly, his boss asks why he has a calendar at home and why he left it lying around without even opening it, since he got it from Shin Jong-sung. But upon touching the object, our protagonist gets a strange glint in his eyes. He is completely shocked to realize that it was a memory from the original owner of the body. From there, he remembers when he was in the car with his friend and called him by name. Seo Jin that asked Jung Woo if they could take that evidence to court. Back at the trial, our protagonist explains that the deceased was recording a diary at the time of the incident, and that something other than her voice was also captured. Gu Sang-jin is perplexed and wonders what this story about a recording is. Desperate, he stands up and objects, saying he doesn't know what it's about but that he needs to stop it, as they were not notified in advance. At that exact moment, the officer stands up, holding the victim's cell phone inside an evidence bag. With a slight smirk, our protagonist watches the victorious scene. Before the judge, he explains that they have just recovered the victim's cell phone and asks for the evidence to be admitted as it is crucial to uncovering the truth of the case. The defendant, Woo Soo-jin, is completely terrified upon seeing the device. Her accomplice can't handle the pressure and freaks out, yelling that he didn't harm her, while the judge asks the bailiff to restrain him. In the audience, everyone comments that they expected a fierce legal battle but never imagined Gu Sang-jin would be completely on the defensive. Amid the chaos, the judge announces a 10-minute recess to decide whether the new evidence will be accepted. Gu Sang-jin is completely furious and clenches his fists, thinking that his entire career as a lawyer is being ruined because of a rookie. With a punch to the table, he refuses to accept that defeat. He then thinks that if he's going down, he's not going down alone. No way. A short time later, the session resumes, and the judge asks the prosecutor and the defense attorney to present themselves. From there, he announces that he will decide whether the cell phone will be admitted as evidence. Without wasting time, our protagonist presses play on the device's recording. The audio reveals Jang Dong-ik's voice confirming that he hit the woman but that she was still breathing, and then he negotiates 300 million to ensure she doesn't survive. The judge then turns to Gu Sang-jin and asks how he responds, since the voice clearly belongs to Jang Dong. The lawyer thinks that even if he rejects the evidence now, it will be admitted at the next hearing anyway. Because of this, he decides to admit the evidence, as he knows there are times when you have to know when to give up. He then concludes that if the case drags on any longer, his image will be destroyed, and the judge accepts the evidence and tells the prosecutor to continue. Our protagonist then turns to the defendant and asks if she knows what is recorded on that cell phone, but the woman remains silent. A new recording starts to play, and in it, Woo Soo-jin's voice complains that her sister is stubborn as heck for not having passed yet and wonders what she will do when she gets the money. The woman then reveals she plans to buy a luxury handbag, and the audience erupts in indignation, questioning how someone can be so inhuman as to use her sister's insurance money to buy a designer bag. Suddenly, the victim's husband stands up, completely furious, and yells at the woman, asking if after all that, she still considers herself human. In tears, the man continues to shout that she took someone's life for such a pathetic reason and that she's not even a person. While being restrained by the bailiffs, he screams for the woman to just drop dead. However, the defendant stares at him coldly and says that Suk-young's passing is all his fault. She then questions why he left home and why he couldn't earn money, stating that's why she took out the insurance. With a completely insane smile, the woman reveals that since she couldn't trust him, she put the insurance in her own name. The man is dragged out of the courtroom in tears, begging to be released. The judge then turns to Gu Sang-jin and asks if he would like to question the witness, but the completely defeated lawyer refuses the offer. Thus, the first hearing is adjourned, and the next one is scheduled for 10 days from now at 2 in the afternoon. Leaving the courthouse, Gu Sang-jin passes by our protagonist and threatens him, saying that next time, he will make him pay for this. Kim Seo-jin just gives a smirk and thinks, "You're wrong, we won't be seeing each other again." Shortly after, he answers a call from his boss Lee Myung-soo and informs him that they've just finished. The boss then asks if there were any mistakes, and our protagonist confirms there were none. He continues on the phone with an air of complete satisfaction and confidence. Outside the courthouse, the young man is immediately surrounded by a crowd of reporters who bombard him with questions about how he discovered the truth behind the case. One of the reporters asks for a brief comment, and our protagonist wonders what the heck is going on. Elsewhere, a newspaper is thrown onto a table with some force. At this, his new mother, Oh My-jung, gets worried and asks what's happening, if it's a strike or an accident. With that, her husband, Kim Jun-man, points to the newspaper and tells her to read it aloud. The woman then begins to read the headline, which talks about a contract murder case uncovered by a rookie prosecutor, and continues reading about the 1 billion won insurance policy. She then explains that the case was almost dismissed as a simple accident, but that prosecutor Kim Seo-jin didn't let any clues slip by, and she is shocked to read his name. At this, his mother asks if it's their Seo-jin, and the proud father confirms that his son is in the newspaper. The man continues, saying he bought all the afternoon edition newspapers with his son's name, and that he will buy all the morning editions, too. His father's face turns red with pride. From there, the whole family celebrates, and the father hugs him, saying, "That's my boy," and that they need to celebrate tonight. The scene then shifts to an apartment building at sunset. The next day, someone's hand turns off the alarm clock, which read 6 in the morning. At that moment, he remembers when Shin Jong Sung offered him a calendar. The memory continues in a bar, where Sung explains that his father said a bank calendar brings wealth, and the old Kim Jin just thanks him. However, Kim Yoon-won, the protagonist's cousin, asks if Sung's father will really get the transfer to Seoul, and he replies that Uncle Jun asked for it because he wants Jin in the capital. Yoon-hwan then questions if the young man's father agreed to the plan, and Sung explains that obviously, it wasn't for free, as he had to make it seem like a very difficult favor. He continues, saying that this way, Kim Jin will feel grateful for the help, and Yoon-won asks what he will do when his cousin is in Seoul, if he will turn him into a lackey. With a mocking smile, his cousin replies that it's obvious, as he needs to be tamed, and if he stayed in Dongnam, he would be stuck with cold cases forever. And just thinking about Jin's regret already makes him very happy. At this, the two make a toast to their newest lackey, Kim Jin. Back in the present, our protagonist observes the calendar that made him remember all that. A slight smirk appears on his face. Now the young man finally understands the whole situation and how things really were. A short time later, he is back at the Dongnam Public Prosecutor's office. Our guy then heads to the door of room 284 and knocks to enter. However, before he even opens it, he hears his boss yelling on the phone, questioning if that makes any sense. Lee Mang-soo continues shouting, saying he doesn't care how big the office is, that this place is an exile, and wonders why they would put a promising young prosecutor in this hole. He even yells at the person on the other end of the line that, if they like it so much here, they should come work here. Personally, the man hangs up the phone, wondering if they have any brains, and at that exact moment, Jin enters and announces he has arrived. His boss then calls him by name and invites him for a chat. Lee Mang-soo gets straight to the point and asks if it's true that his father's younger brother is Chief Prosecutor Kim Young-jun, and the young man confirms. So, Lee Mang-soo turns and says he will find a way to pull some strings. He explains that although it's not official yet, the next assignments for the rookies are practically set. However, he takes out a cigarette and says the problem is Kim Jin himself, because, if he does nothing, he will end up stuck in Dongnam. The boss warns him that staying here too long won't be good for his resume, and people will say he's been tainted by hanging out with people like them. With that, he advises the young man to use the chance his father gave him and get out of this place, as a guy with a bright future shouldn't have to deal with this. Our protagonist just listens to everything in silence with a thoughtful expression. However, to his boss's surprise, our guy states that he intends to stay here. Jin explains that he doesn't want to rely on connections so early in his career, and besides, he wants to learn more from his boss and asks him to allow it, leaving the man completely confused. With a smile, the young man says he knows the kind of men Lee Mang-soo and the others used to be, and that's why he wants to learn from them up close, as it's better to hide his claws and get stronger here than to be Kim Yoon-hwan's lackey in Seoul. The boss asks if he's serious, and our protagonist confirms, and the man comments that many of the exiled prosecutors here were once considered legendary blades. At this, Lee Mang-soo just turns and tells him to do whatever he wants. As our guy leaves, a coworker comments that the boss is just acting that way because he's embarrassed. Our protagonist gives a slight smirk at the situation. In the hallway, Lee Mang-soo thinks that of course, saying he wanted to learn from him wasn't a lie, but he wonders what he could teach a kid like that. With a determined look, he concludes that he can't let a guy like that rot in a place like this, and at least he won't have to worry about him stabbing him in the back. In another room, someone comments to our protagonist that his situation is pretty bad. Sung mocks the young man, saying he was exiled from the start and suggests he use his uncle's connections since he himself is going to Seoul. But inside, our protagonist thinks he's happy to get away from that guy. The coworker continues, saying Jin is talented and will be transferred soon, but he interrupts him, stating he just got lucky in the case, and that even the other prosecutors agree. Before he could finish bragging, saying that if the case were his, he would have solved it all, the room door opens. Lee Mang-soo enters, completely furious, and asks what all the noise is, threatening the young man, saying he doesn't care if it's his last day of training, because one more word and he's done for, and Sung immediately apologizes. The boss then approaches and asks what his name was, and the young man replies that it's Sung. So, Lee Mang-soo throws a file on the table and questions how they should handle that case. Completely terrified, the coworker picks up the papers and says he will check immediately. He then analyzes the file and discovers it's a case of embezzlement and fraud, and thinks he needs to be careful as it's an easy case to be dismissed for lack of evidence. The investigation reveals that the company's CEO fled with tens of billions of won, and the secretary responsible for the funds was accused of complicity but claims innocence. At this, Jong suggests they drop the charges, and his boss questions why. The young man explains that the person is just a secretary who received no profit, and that her salary was barely above minimum wage, and Lee Mang-soo asks if anyone has a different opinion. Our protagonist then speaks up, stating there is a high probability that the secretary is an accomplice, and his boss asks him to explain why. Seo Jin says it's hard to believe that a secretary who worked for 10 years in a company handling so much money received only a minimum wage salary, and that he suspects she received kickbacks from the CEO as a commission. He continues, explaining that there is probably a separate bank account where untraceable funds were deposited, and that if they find the account owner and check the call records, the relationship between them will be revealed. Lee Mong-soo then comments that our protagonist's opinion is very different from his colleagues. With that, he says that's exactly why the young man shouldn't be here, but Seo Jin replies with a smile that he doesn't think location matters. The boss then turns to Shin Jong-sung and states that a guy like Kim Seo Jin is the one who should stay, leaving the other completely confused. From there, Lee Ming-soo ends the day's class and tells the two to kill some time before going home. As our guy leaves, Shin Jong-sung is furious, wondering why he's being treated that way. Lee So, he approaches and asks her colleague if he felt it too, and he is confused. She then explains that she feels like she's falling further and further behind Prosecutor Kim. Because of this, the girl decides she needs to find a way to learn more, or she'll never be able to catch up to him. Shin Jong-sung thinks irritably that he already knows that and that the current Kim Seo Jin is definitely several steps ahead of him. Outside, our protagonist answers a call from his father, who insists he go to Seoul, as his uncle has enough power to get the transfer, but the young man refuses, saying he wants to get there on his own merit. His father laughs and says, "That's my boy," but asks him to let him know if things get too tough, and Seo Jin agrees to count on him if it's really necessary. And so, he says goodbye and says he'll call again later. After hanging up the phone, he has a determined expression. In front of the window, the young man thinks that he will no longer live inside his uncle Kim Young-jun's birdcage. To ensure all this isn't seen as just luck, he heads to the record storage room, thinking he needs to keep proving his skills. With that, he decides to start by investigating the cold cases of Dongnam. The young man thinks that since they are cases that have remained unsolved until now, there's no risk even if he fails. As he grabs a box of files, he wonders what would happen if he succeeded, because there would be no more certain achievement than that, and he decides that the first cold case to be solved will be the Dongnam tragedy that shook the entire country 10 years ago. The investigation reveals the case of the kidnapping of Yu Ah-seong, a third-grade student who was found brutally slain in a manhole 2 weeks after disappearing, with signs of torture and an eye removed, but without any trace of the culprit. Thus, our protagonist begins to analyze all the case documents. Crouched on the floor and surrounded by papers, he is furious to think that a monster like that is walking the streets casually. With a determined look, he vows that he will make sure to catch the culprit and give him a taste of hell. From there, he continues to examine the files in search of any clue. Suddenly, a voice interrupts him, asking what he was doing alone with the Yu Ah-seong case. It was his colleague, Lee So-hee, and he wonders why she is there and why she is suddenly investigating that incident. She explains that since she ended up staying here, she might as well do something useful. Our guy then says he doesn't like that a monster like that has been on the loose for all this time. At this, the girl agrees and says that's true. With a smile, she comments that it's a shame, because if she had known what kind of person he was, she would have gotten closer, and since she was assigned to headquarters, they will see each other sometimes. Our protagonist then says he will first meet with the detective in charge of the Yu Ah-seong case, and the girl asks if he's going now. With some hesitation, Lee So-hee asks if she can go with him. Holding the box of files, Kim Seo Jin agrees to her idea. Meanwhile, in the office of the chief prosecutor of the Seoul Central District, Kim Young-jun, another conversation is taking place. Kim Yoon-won comments to his father that he heard Seo Jin ended up staying in Dongnam and suggests that the JTJ law firm pulled some strings to get revenge. With a smirk, our protagonist uncle comments that Seo Jin was getting arrogant even before finishing his training. His cousin then understands that all of this is retaliation for defeating lawyer Gu Sang-jin. Kim Young-jun explains that he didn't stop the action to create an even bigger debt, and that when Seo Jin's father found out about the situation, he would surely ask to have him transferred to Seoul. He puts out his cigarette and reveals his plan to place Seo Jin under Yoon-won's supervision. When he arrived in Seoul, with a hand on his son's shoulder, he tells him to train the young man well so that he can't do anything without his help, and Yoon-won agrees. At that exact moment, Young-jun's cell phone starts to ring, and he thinks that everything is happening exactly as he planned. It was our protagonist's father, who reminds him of the offer to help Seo Jin, and the uncle pretends he will help despite the complicated procedures. However, Kim Jun-man interrupts him and says he called to let him know it's no longer necessary, as Seo Jin doesn't want to use connections and will stay in Dongnam, leaving the uncle completely shocked. Our guy's father even comments that hardships in youth are valuable and thanks him before hanging up, leaving Young-jun furious. Elsewhere, Kim Yoon-won is desperate to learn that Seo Jin decided to stay, as now he might have to go to the provinces, and he only wanted to do his internship in Seoul. Kim Young-jun looks at his son and calls him a complete good for nothing. At this, he tells Yoon-won to get out of there, and the young man asks if he did something wrong. Alone now, our protagonist uncle thinks about how how Seo Jin dared to reject his will and decide to stay. A wicked look forms on his face as he plans his revenge. With that, Jun vows that he will bury Kim Seo Jin for good. On the streets of Dongnam, some people are impressed by the beauty of someone passing by. Our protagonist and Lee So he walk together, and she notices that everyone is looking at them. The girl then wonders if the young man has gotten used to all that attention, but he denies it. Suddenly, Seo Jin spots his friend Lee Jung Woo talking to some people. As he approaches, he hears the officer reassuring a man and saying he will get in touch if there is any progress. The boy next to the man is crying, and our protagonist realizes it's a missing person case. At that moment, Jung Woo turns and sees them approaching. The young man is surprised to see the two together. Completely shocked, the officer asks why he came with a celebrity, and Seo Jin explains that she is a coworker, leaving Jung Woo even more astonished. Lee So he then introduces herself as a prosecutor from the Dongnam office, and the officer is completely speechless. The officer then composes himself and formally introduces himself as Lee Jung Woo. He explains that he works in the violent crimes unit and offers to help in any way he can. As they walk, our protagonist spots something shiny on the ground. He picks up the object and wonders why there is a ring there. The ring has a golden star in the center and looks quite peculiar. Upon touching the object, a new vision begins, and he sees someone's hands tied, with the same ring on one of the fingers. The scene shifts to a boy tied up in a corner while a hooded figure approaches. Then the boy's eye is violently removed. The vision continues with the hooded figure preparing to deliver the final blow, and so, he strikes the victim with full force. With his head completely destroyed, the boy's life fades away. Back in the present, our protagonist understands that this is a memory from the time of the Yu As Seong incident. He is confused because the ring was not on the list of evidence for the case. At that moment, Jung Woo approaches and says the object looks like the ring that Detective Jeong Minju always carries around, and that he must have dropped it. Kim Seo Jin questions who Detective Jeong Minju is, and his friend explains that he is the one in charge of the Yua Seong case that he came to see today. Our protagonist holds the ring and is in shock, as he cannot believe that possibility. A short time later, he finally meets Detective Jeong Minju, and the two formally introduce themselves. Lee So he also introduces herself as a prosecutor from the Dongnam office. The detective then invites him to see the evidence, but our guy stops him for a moment, and so, he shows the ring and explains that he found it out front and heard it belonged to the detective. Completely shocked, Jeong Minju wonders how the ring got there, as he was sure it was in his wallet, and our protagonist suggests it must be a gift from his son. The man nervously agrees and thanks him for picking up the object, while hastily putting it away. However, our guy notices that he is lying, as the ring should belong to Yu As Seong, and wonders why the detective has a piece of evidence with him personally. From there, they head to the evidence storage room. There, the detective shows them the pieces that were presumably used in the crime. Jeong Mingyu explains that most of the injuries seem to have been caused by that hammer. Our protagonist then reads the report and notes that the body's left eye was removed, but the weapon used for that was not found. The detective continues, saying that besides the victim's bloodstains, no other evidence was found, and that the culprit is no ordinary scumbag. At this, Seo Jin asks if that is all the evidence, and the man confirms that it is, excluding the cigarette butt that was immediately sent for DNA reanalysis after his call. The detective then explains that at the time, there was no match for criminals in the DNA analysis results, and that they even checked the DNA of 120 men living within a 4-kilometer radius, but the result was the same. Our protagonist touches the hammer, but no psychometry reaction occurs, and the detective explains that since the area is a tourist spot, they concluded the investigation by speculating that the culprit could be one of the tourists. Seo Jin then questions if he also believes the culprit is a tourist. With a nervous smile, the man dodges the question and does not respond. Our guy thanks him for his time, and as he takes off his glove, the detective offers to help if he needs anything else. After leaving the place, the two head to the parking lot. Outside, Detective Jeong Minyu asks Lee Jung Woo if he is friends with the inspector, and the officer confirms. So, he questions what kind of person Seo Jin is, and Jung Woo explains that once he sets a goal, he's the kind of guy who will go to the end to achieve it. The detective has a strange expression upon hearing that. Our protagonist thinks that no matter what the man says, he knows something is wrong. A short time later, he and his colleague arrive at the crime scene. As he approaches, Seo Jin wonders if this is the place where Yua Seong was discovered. The girl confirms and comments that it has been 10 years since the incident and wonders if there are any clues left. Our protagonist replies that you never know and that they can't afford to miss any details. He then observes the alley and notes that almost nothing has changed in 10 years, with little movement even during the day, and that the security camera was only installed after the incident, making making the place a complete blind spot at the time. The young man concludes that the culprit was someone familiar with the layout and atmosphere of the neighborhood, and that the manhole where the body was dumped was always hidden under abandoned appliances and furniture. While writing in his notebook, he agrees and says that makes sense, because at the time, no one but a resident would have known about the existence of that manhole. Our protagonist then remembers that because of the cigarette butt, the local residents were cleared as suspects. With this, he understands that the investigation could have been directed that way because of Detective Jeong Minju. Thus, he states that there is a high chance the culprit was a local resident at the time, and that he knew very well how the neighborhood worked. At this, the girl questions why he thinks that way. She then reminds him that according to the report, no one who lived in the neighborhood at the time matched the DNA found on the cigarette butt, which would make a stranger disguised as a tourist more likely. With a slight smirk, our guy questions if she is sure that the cigarette butt belonged to the culprit. He explains that of course it did, as the butt was found among the victim's belongings, thrown on top of the body, and if it wasn't the culprit's, there would be no reason for it to be there. However, Seo Jin suggests that, unless the culprit intentionally planted it, which leaves his colleague completely shocked. From there, he thinks there might be other victims, and the scene shifts to the office at night. At his desk, he analyzes a request document for the disposal of animal carcasses, and says it was as he expected. He then discovers that before the Xiong case, reports of animal carcass disposal were frequently registered, and that all the bodies found had been mutilated in some way. Our protagonist also notices that after the boy's case, the number of reports dropped drastically. At this, he concludes that this could mean one of two things. His eyes then widen as he finally understands what is happening. Suddenly, our protagonist feels something strange and has a vision of Detective Jeong Minju, questioning if this is his psychometry. In the vision, someone asks Jeong Minju to help the boy Asong get home after school. The person on the phone explains that the neighborhood is a bit dangerous lately, and that an unexpected work issue will leave him worried about the boy going alone. With that, he asks the detective to walk the boy home. Jeong Minju agrees without any problem, stating that he can do this favor as he is a friend's son. The vision ends, and elsewhere, Jeong Minju answers his phone. He then asks if the person on the other end of the line has a moment to talk. Our protagonist finally puts the pieces together and understands that the psychometry he saw when he first greeted the detective showed that on the day of Seong's disappearance, Jeong Minju had promised to meet the victim. He then concludes that the detective was familiar with the terrain and knew the victim personally. Furthermore, he was in a position that allowed him to interfere with the crime scene, tamper with evidence, and even carried the victim's ring without authorization, making Jeong Minju the most likely suspect at the moment. However, a doubt arises in his mind as he doesn't understand why the man would still be carrying something like that, as it would be like announcing to everyone that he is the culprit. To be sure, our protagonist decides he needs to track the detective's movements on the day of the incident, but suddenly he notices something. A cat appears in the alley, and he finds it strange, as it's the first time he's seen a stray cat since arriving in that neighborhood. His colleague approaches to pet the animal and comments that with so many alleys, one would expect there to be many cats, but she hadn't seen any either. The girl continues to observe the feline with a thoughtful expression. He turns and asks why our protagonist is so far away. With an awkward smile, he explains that it's not because he dislikes cats, but for some reason, felines have always hated him. The girl finds that strange, as the cat is super friendly with people, and even though she's never seen it before, it jumped right into her arms, wondering if it could be a house cat. However, the animal suddenly leaps from her arms towards our guy, and so the feline latches onto Seo Jin's face, catching him completely by surprise. With the cat's contact, his psychometry ability is suddenly activated. From there, a new vision of the past emerges in his mind. He then sees a post covered with several missing person posters on a rainy night. Then, in the same alley, a hooded figure is crouched in the darkness. The scene shows the aftermath of a violent act, with a hammer thrown on the ground. The hooded figure seems to observe the result of their work coldly. At this, the vision reveals the criminal's hands holding a glass with a victim's eye inside. After the psychometry ends, the cat is now in our protagonist's arms and stares at him, as if it knows him. His colleague approaches, worried, and asks if he's okay, and the young man confirms, somewhat dazed. His mind then processes the vision, and he understands that the same weapon from the Seong case was used, and that another victim had an eye removed after the crime. Our protagonist then realizes that the person he saw in the vision was the culprit of the Seong case. He understands that even before the boy's case, the criminal was already committing crimes against animals, either as a rehearsal for something worse or just to satisfy a sick desire. While petting the cat, he concludes that cases like this never end as single crimes and that perhaps other victims simply haven't been discovered yet. He then sends a message to an officer asking to check how many families have moved in and out of an 8-kilometer radius of the case area in the last 10 years, as the culprit may have left the area. Or the other possibility is that his target escalated to humans, but there were no murder cases that could be considered serial. With this, he supposes that if the culprit remained in the area and continued his crimes, it means he hid the bodies much better than he did with Yu Seong. In that case, the clue must be among the unsolved missing person cases. Our guy then remembers the case he saw earlier and realizes that the missing people may be connected, which means victims are still being made, and he needs to catch the killer as soon as possible. It's already past 8 at night, and the work continues. Suddenly, his office door opens. It was Shin Jong-sung who questions if he is investigating the Yu Seong case again, and if he thinks cold cases are easy to solve. He then grabs the missing teenager reports from the desk and dismisses them as simple runaways, saying that kids these days are spoiled. Our protagonist just stares at him in silence, unfazed. Jong-sung continues the taunt, saying it seems Seo Jin really enjoyed the fame and is digging up an unsolved case like an idiot, and claims he's saying this because he worries about him like a brother. He then reminds him that in a few days, he will go to Seoul and grabs him by the collar, asking if he is upset that he is going to the capital alone. Jong-sung mockingly offers help and tells Seo Jin to look him up if he needs anything for old time's sake. However, our protagonist cuts him off coldly and tells him to get his filthy hand away from him. The coworker is completely shocked by the audacity, but before he could do anything, our guy places a hand on his face to stop him. Suddenly, his phone rings, and he answers the call, introducing himself as Kim Seo Jin, while Jong-sung fumes in the background for being ignored. Later that night, our protagonist goes to a bar to meet someone. Already seated at the table, Detective Jeong Minju questions why he asked to see him. With a serious expression, the man says he actually has something to ask the prosecutor. He then questions why he is digging up an old case from 10 years ago, and our protagonist replies that he just wants to see the culprit's face. The detective agrees that this is the reason they do the work. They do, but hesitates for a moment before starting to speak. With a curious look, our guy waits for what he has to say, and the man states that he needs to tell him the truth. Sweating profusely, Jeong Minju confesses that he has been pursuing that case alone for 10 years. He then reveals that the victim, Yua Sung, was his friend's son, and the boy always followed him around, admiring his work as a police officer and even asking to see his handcuffs. In a flashback, he remembers showing the handcuffs to the happy boy and says that this happened even on the day he disappeared. Back in the present, the detective grips the glass tightly and says that's why he wanted to catch the culprit with his own hands, and so he downs his drink in one go while our protagonist just watches the scene in silence. Jeong Mingyu slams the glass on the table and confesses that he feels the limits of his abilities as he pursued the case for 10 years without any leads and was thinking of giving up. However, he heard that our protagonist has a persistent personality and that he is also aware of his performance in the last case. Thus, the detective asks the young man for a favor, which surprises him. Back in his apartment, our protagonist analyzes the files the detective gave him. He carefully observes the contents of the brown envelope. In a flashback, Jeong Minju slides the envelope across the table and says he wants to pass the baton to him. Our protagonist doesn't understand what that means. Upon opening the envelope, he discovers it is a list of the main suspects in the Yu Seong case. He notices that some of the names match the suspects he already had in mind and wonders if this is a trap to divert suspicion or if the man is being sincere. Jeong Minju then reveals that after our guy visited the police station, he received a threatening letter from the real culprit. The man explains that the letter was left on his doorstep along with a photo of his youngest son and that he is terrified that his family might get hurt. At this, he says he intends to give up the investigation and begs our protagonist to catch the scumbag. While grabbing a drink from the fridge, the young man remembers the detective's alibi. On the day of the incident, he went to pick up Yu Seong but had to return to the station because of an urgent call and told the boy to go alone. Since then, all traces of the boy have completely vanished. Suddenly, his phone rings and upon answering, a voice on the other end shouts his name. On the other end of the line, the person reveals that they have finally found a match for the DNA from the cigarette butt, leaving our protagonist completely shocked. The next day, at the Dongnam branch, someone explains that the suspect recently served time for robbery and assault, and that's why they got a record of him. Our protagonist then analyzes the file of Hyo Jong Jae, a 40-year-old man, and understands why there was no data on him 10 years ago. However, Jeong Minju reveals that the man has a solid valid alibi for the day of the incident, as at the time, he was hospitalized on Jeju Island for a minor fracture. He continues saying the suspect never left Jeju Island until 5 years ago and naturally has never been to Chosin-ri either. With this, our guy concludes that, as he already suspected, the cigarette butt was a false clue left by the real culprit. Thus, he wonders how the cigarette butt of a man who was on Jeju Island ended up in Chosin-ri. Our protagonist observes the evidence in the plastic bag with a curious look. Upon touching the object, his psychometry ability is instantly activated. From there, he has a vision of the past that takes him to a place with palm trees and a plane in the sky. The scene shows Jeju Island, where a group of uniformed students are on a field trip while a man smokes, sitting on a bench. A short time later, the man follows the students at a certain distance. He then throws the cigarette butt on the ground after finishing his smoke. Immediately after, a gloved hand carefully picks up the butt from the ground. The vision ends, revealing one of the students with a sinister smile on his face as he puts the butt in a plastic bag. The vision takes him back 10 years, the exact year of the incident. Back in the present, our protagonist realizes he has seen the uniform from the psychometry somewhere before. He then recalls seeing a student in the same outfit crying desperately. With a slight smile on his face, he finally understands where he needs to go. In front of the neighborhood school, our protagonist thinks he has found what he was looking for. There, he spots some students gathered around a cat while one of them takes a picture and comments on how cute the animal is. One of the boys tries to call the cat, offering a snack, but his friend tells him to give up, as he's been trying for 2 years and the cat always runs away. At that moment, a man with glasses approaches and comments that there are hardly any cats around here. One of the students explains that the cat is raised by the school, and the man, who appears to be a teacher, turns to our protagonist, asking what he is doing there. One of the students recognizes him and is completely surprised. The teacher then tells everyone to go home, and one of the boys jokes that he just wants to keep the cat for himself. The man then suggests they study at night, and everyone says goodbye and leaves in a hurry. As he walks away, one of the students looks back towards our protagonist. His friends hurry him along, and he runs to catch up with them. With that, our protagonist approaches the teacher and reminds him that they have met once before in front of the police station. The teacher remembers him and calls him Prosecutor Kim Seo-jin, leaving our protagonist surprised that he knows his name. With a smile, the man explains that he is probably the most famous person in the neighborhood now, because of the news in the newspaper. At that moment, the cat rubs against the teacher's leg with a friendly meow. While petting the animal, the teacher reveals that he has heard a lot about him through Detective Lee Jung-woo. He continues, saying the officer bragged so much about his friend that he wanted to meet him and that the meeting worked out well. Our protagonist tries to pet the cat, but the animal suddenly attacks him. The feline then runs off, and our guy comments that strangely, cats don't seem to like him very much, and the teacher nods in agreement. At this, the man takes advantage of fate, bringing them together again and invites him for tea in the reception room. In the room, the teacher gets straight to the point and asks if the cold case he is investigating is Yua Song's. Our protagonist questions if it was Jung-woo who told him, but the man explains that he only heard it was an old case and that when people talk about it in the city, Yua Song's case is always the most famous. The word "callways" catches our guy's attention, and he questions him about it, since according to the students, he was only transferred there 2 years ago. With a smile, the teacher explains that his hometown is actually Chosin-ri, and that's why the case weighs on his mind, before asking if there has been any progress in the investigation. Our protagonist replies that he can't give details but reveals that they have narrowed it down to a main suspect who had a meeting scheduled with the victim on the day of the incident. He then changes the subject and comments on how the teacher looks much younger than Jung-woo, and the man confirms they are the same age, leaving our protagonist surprised. Thus, our guy concludes that they are the same age and hopes they get along well, and the teacher agrees, happy to have found someone his age in the city. And so, our protagonist questions if that school is also his alma mater, and the teacher confirms. With that, he deduces that the man must be in the yearbooks, and since they are the same age, he calculates the graduation year and heads to the bookshelf. Our guy then grabs the correct yearbook with a smile and thinks he'll take a peek at the teacher's past. From there, he begins to flip through the pages of the book, observing the students' photos. Suddenly, he stops at a specific page and analyzes it carefully. The photo shows a class field trip to Jeju Island, which confirms our protagonist's suspicion. With a victorious smile, he finally understands everything and thinks, "Gotcha, you scumbag." The yearbook then confirms that the culprit was a minor who studied at Dongnam High School at the time, and to confuse the investigation, he went to Jeju Island during the school trip to collect cigarette butts, proving to be a criminal genius since high school. And our protagonist wonders how many more victims he has made in the last 10 years. As he walks, he thinks that things will no longer go the culprit's way. Suddenly he stops when someone approaches him. A student approaches and asks if he is a prosecutor. Our protagonist recognizes the boy, who looks a bit embarrassed, and asks what the problem is. The student then bows and begs him to help find his friend, leaving our guy completely surprised. With a red face, the boy explains that his friend Shin has been missing for a month and that the police think he just ran away, but he knows his friend would never abandon his grandmother alone, no matter how rebellious he was. Our protagonist hands a handkerchief to the student and asks him to calm down before asking where he last saw his friend, and the boy replies that it was at school on the day he disappeared. However, the boy reveals that 3 days after his friend stopped going to school, teacher Jae-won saw him in the city center, but he disappeared very quickly. With this, our protagonist concludes that the last time the boy was seen was by the teacher. As the two talk in the schoolyard, someone watches them from a window. The person spying on them was the teacher himself, who stared at them with a less than friendly expression. A short time later, our protagonist is in his car in the parking lot. Suddenly, his phone rings, and he answers a call from an investigator. He then asks if the man found anything about the houses that moved out of the area where the incident occurred. The investigator explains that there have been no suspicious moves in the last 10 years, but that there is one house that bothers him a bit. While writing in his notebook, he asks if our protagonist has heard of the haunted house that is famous in the neighborhood. The man gets nervous and assures him he is not kidding and that he needs to tell him something. Our guy continues the conversation on the phone while driving through the parking lot. With a slight smirk, he seems to have a plan in mind. Shortly after, the entire police station springs into action, with officers mobilizing quickly. Meanwhile, the investigator's phone vibrates on the table, indicating a new call. Lee Jung-woo is surprised to receive a message from his friend and wonders what got into Seo Jin to contact him first. In the message, our protagonist invites him for a drink the next day and says the tab is on him. Plus, he has a great topic for conversation. The officer is completely confused by the mention of a topic for conversation. The next day at the Dongnam police station, our protagonist arrives at the location and is immediately called by his friend. As he approaches, Jung-woo waves to him, and the teacher who is sitting next to him also greets him. The young man feigns surprise at seeing the teacher there, and the man explains that he had some questions for Jung-woo about the missing person case. The officer is curious to know when the two became so close, and Seo Jin explains that they just bumped into each other and had some tea. At this, Jung-woo suggests the three of them go for a drink, and the teacher agrees if it's not a bother, and our protagonist also accepts the idea. And so, the three leave the police station together, ready for the night. However, as they leave, they run into Detective Jeong Minju, who questions if the young men are going for a drink. The man explains that he had an urgent matter to resolve, and that's why he stopped by. Suddenly, the star-shaped ring falls from his pocket and rolls on the ground. Our protagonist picks up the object and comments on how the detective drops it frequently while handing it to the man, who just thanks him. However, he holds the ring and questions why it would be strange for the detective to have that object, leaving the man completely confused. Our protagonist approaches and asks if the detective is going to play dumb until the end and reveals that the grandmother from the convenience store across from the school has an incredible memory. He then drops the bombshell, revealing that the ring was a gift Jeong Minju bought for Yoo Ah-seong on the day of the incident 10 years ago, leaving the man completely in shock. Seeing the scene, his friend Jung-woo becomes furious and grabs him by the arm, asking what he thinks he's doing. Our protagonist ignores his friend and continues the accusation, stating that at the time of his passing, Yoo Ah-seong was wearing the ring the detective gave him. He reveals that the old woman from the store remembered everything, and in a flashback, we see the detective walking with the boy, who happily showed off the ring, and so, he questions why the ring that should have been in the evidence locker ended up in the detective's pocket. The completely shocked officer turns to his superior and asks if that's true, and the man stammers, trying to say he can explain everything. Sweat drips down the detective's face as he is completely terrified by the revelation. Our guy stares at him coldly and says he will hear his explanation in court. His friend is completely shaken by his superior's betrayal. Without hesitation, Jung-woo takes out the handcuffs and arrests the detective, telling him to come with him. As he takes him away, the officer complains to our protagonist, asking if that was the so-called topic of conversation and why he didn't tell him before. Kim Seo-jin just watches the two walk away while the teacher is shocked by the scene in the background. The teacher is completely in disbelief at what is happening and wonders how Detective Jeong could do something like that. However, a slight, sinister smile appears on his face, revealing his true intentions. Our protagonist observes the teacher with a slight smile. Meanwhile, in a dark room, the only light coming in is from a small window. There we see a young man tied and gagged, completely helpless on the bed. Suddenly, a sound echoes through the place, indicating that someone is trying to enter. The boy is completely terrified to realize he is no longer alone. Shortly after, the doorknob turns and the room door slowly opens. The person who enters is the teacher himself, who stares at him with a cold look. A sinister smile forms on his face as he observes his victim. He then begins to laugh hysterically and thinks he can't believe Jeong Minju got caught, since it was he himself who sent you. Ah Sung's ring to the detective. As he wipes a tear from laughing so hard, he says that's what they get for bothering him with a closed case. With a satisfied look, he concludes that in the end, everything worked out. From there, he heads to a shelf full of jars with his bizarre keepsakes. Completely euphoric, he celebrates as he can finally see his collection again. He picks up one of the jars and says that since the reinvestigation began, he thought he would perish without being able to see them again. With a thoughtful look, he seems to remember something important. The teacher then turns to the bed and asks Ha Shin if he is still alive. With a hammer in hand, he says the boy must have been bored alone for a few days, but now everything is okay. With a completely insane smile, he pulls back the sheets and says the teacher is going to have some fun with him from now on, and so he raises the weapon, ready to deliver the final blow. However, he suddenly notices something and turns around, completely shocked. Out of nowhere, the teacher takes a powerful punch to the face that shatters his glasses. Shortly after, a kick sends him flying to the other side of the room. Lying on the floor, he sees that his attacker was Lee Jung-woo and asks what the officer is doing there. At that moment, another person enters the place, and the teacher scrambles backward. Scared, the man is completely terrified by the unexpected situation. With a warrant in hand, our protagonist stares at him and says the game of hide and seek is over. With a victorious smile, he tells the man to enjoy it, because from now on, he won't have a shred of freedom. Jung-woo handcuffs him and informs him that he is being arrested for the kidnapping and assault of Lee Ha-shin, and also for the murder of Yu Ah-seong. In a desperate act, the teacher grabs the hammer and yells that he won't let himself be caught like that. He then tries to hit Jung-woo, but the officer blocks the blow with his arm and calls him a scumbag. Suddenly, a police officer points to the window and warns our protagonist that the suspect is escaping. With a mocking smile, the teacher scoffs, saying the game of hide and seek is over and that no matter how hard Kim Seo-jin fights, he will never be able to catch him. At that exact moment, Detective Jeong Minju appears with a determined look. With a swift move, he throws himself on top of the teacher and tackles him to the ground, preventing him from escaping. The impact of the blow leaves the man completely stunned. Lying on the ground with nowhere to run, the teacher is finally apprehended by the police officers. The detective then lets out a sigh of relief for having managed to stop the criminal. He then approaches the fallen man and informs him of his right to remain silent. A short time later, the house in the woods is completely surrounded by police cars and an ambulance as the teacher is escorted out. As he is placed inside the car, the man is confronted by our protagonist. The young man approaches and says they have a lot to talk about, and that they will see each other again soon. The teacher is completely terrified by the threat, and our guy's intimidating look. As the police cars drive away, our protagonist's friend says he still can't believe what happened. He continues, saying he never imagined the teacher would be a complete maniac, and that honestly, until the moment they saved the victim, he thought our protagonist was on the wrong track. In a flashback, he remembers when he found the kidnapped boy and comforted him, while looking at the jars on the shelf, completely shocked. The officer continues to complain to our protagonist, saying that if he was going to set up a plan with the detective, he should have told him first, as he really believed the man was the culprit. With a smirk, Kim Spleo-jinins that to perfectly deceive the enemy, you must first deceive your allies, and thanks his friend, because since his anger was genuine, Lee Jae-won fell into the trap easily. Jung-woo puffs out his cheeks in anger because his friend always has an answer for everything, and our protagonist just calls him a simpleton. Calmer now, the officer lights a cigarette and seriously asks how the young man managed to track the location, and what the reason was for him to suspect the teacher. Kim Seo-jin is thoughtful for a moment before starting to explain the whole situation. The decisive reason that made him suspect Lee Jae-won was a small detail he noticed when he met the teacher at the school with the cat. At that exact moment, he had a memory from his psychometry that left him completely shocked. The vision showed the way the culprit touched the victim's eye, and it was exactly the same way the teacher touched the cat's eye. The teacher's actions were frighteningly identical to those of the criminal he saw in his vision. Furthermore, our guy gathered other important clues, such as the fact that the teacher was from Chosun, right, was a student at Dongnam High in the year of the incident, client and had gone to Jeju Island on a school trip days before the crime. Given all this, our protagonist concludes that all the clues pointed directly to the man, and to top it off, around the same time that Lee Jae-won returned to Chosun-rai, a house in a neighboring village was secretly sold, and the location was known for being remote and haunted. In a conversation with the village chief, he found out that a pleasant-looking young man appeared wanting to live there, and despite the rumors, the chief let him move in exchange for a small donation. But the most important thing was that the village chief told him that the screams got worse since the young man moved in, and he was even worried about needing an exorcism. With all the pieces falling into place, our protagonist calls the office manager with a satisfied smile. With that, he tells the office manager to inform the village chief that he won't need the exorcism because he will catch the so-called ghost himself. From there, it was easy to deduce that the young man was Lee Jae-hwan, and since the house was the likely crime scene, our protagonist requested an emergency search warrant. Jung-woo still questions why he stopped talking all of a sudden, but our protagonist thinks he can't just explain about psychometry or he'll sound like a complete lunatic, and so he just says it was a prosecutor's intuition, leaving his friend even more suspicious. The evidence recovered from Lee Jae-hwan's house was more than enough to prove that he took Yoo Ah-sung's life. However, the bizarre keepsakes on the shelf showed there were still countless other cases to be discovered. To expose all of Lee Jae-hwan's depravity, it was decided to form a special investigation team at the Dongnam branch. Sometime later, our protagonist and Detective Jeong are celebrating with a toast at sunset. Kim Seo-jin thanks the detective, saying that everything went much more smoothly thanks to him, and the man says it was nothing. With a smile on his face, he remembers that on the day he said he was going to give up, it was the prosecutor himself who convinced him to continue. The detective then gets serious and says that he actually needs to tell him something. He confesses that the real culprit got angry because he insisted on the case and sent him the threatening letter with Ah-seong's ring, and because of that, he was so terrified that he wanted to drop everything. However, upon holding the ring in his hand, he realized he simply couldn't give up. He remembers that on that day, Ah-seong was being very clingy and begged him to stay, as he had promised to play with him. The detective then promised that he would make it up to him next time and asked him to be a good boy. The detective remembers buying the ring the boy wanted so much to calm him down and how happy he was, as if he had never cried. The memory continues with Ah-seong leaving with a big smile, and that image of his back was seared into the man's memory. However, the happy image soon transforms into the tragic sight of the boy's lifeless hand. He reveals that he hasn't been able to forget that scene for 10 years, since he saw the body in the morgue. With that, the man clenches his fist tightly, overcome by emotion and the pain of loss. Our protagonist thinks it took a long time, but finally the boy can rest in peace. The detective then starts to cry and thanks the prosecutor for finally solving the case. The scene then shifts to the Gangwon District Prosecutor's office. Inside, Kim Yun-won is on the phone with a smug smile and celebrates that his boring life in the countryside will finally be over tomorrow. However, the person on the other end of the line warns him to keep Kim Seo-jin on a leash, as he has been making a lot of noise lately. The voice explains that our protagonist has been acting like a loose cannon. He continues, saying the young man thinks he's Sherlock Holmes, and that it's a joke that he tries to solve every cold case he finds. Yun-hwan then asks if he has really solved any cases, but the person replies that they are filed away for a reason and that the sister's case was just blind luck. The person continues and says he heard he arrested someone yesterday, but that he can be sure it won't lead to anything. Suddenly, he hangs up the call upon seeing the branch chief and the chief prosecutor getting into the elevator. The branch chief comments that he heard prosecutor Kim even got a full confession in the Yoo Ah-seong case and that they really found a winner this time. At this, he decides to leave today's briefing and interviews to our protagonist, which leaves Shin Jong-sung completely shocked. With a smile on his face, the branch chief comments that with this, they can finally show the suits from Seoul what they're made of. Completely stunned, Jong-sung can't believe what he heard and thinks it's impossible that Kim Seo-jin actually solved a cold case. He is completely desperate, as it's unbelievable that the rookie solved that case. As the two bosses walk away, the young man is furious and thinks he can't just stand by and that he needs to tell Yoon-won what happened. At that moment, he is interrupted by someone approaching and greeting him, calling him Prosecutor Shin. It was his colleague, Lee So-hee, and the young man greets her as she wishes him a safe trip back to Seoul. He is confused and asks why she isn't going since she was also appointed to the main office, but the girl reveals she decided to stay there. The elevator continues to go up as the news catches him by surprise. Completely in shock, he wonders why on earth she decided to stay. He then realizes that to change a finalized personnel order, you need someone very powerful pulling the strings, and it would be impossible without support at the level of a chief prosecutor. At this, he thinks there's no way, so he has that kind of connection, as staying in the Dongnam exile using contacts is very strange, and her background checks said her family was completely ordinary, wondering what the heck is going on. The scene then shifts to the Seoul Central District Prosecutor's office. Inside, someone knocks on the door of one of the offices. The person who greets him is Senior Prosecutor Jo Woo, Jae, Kim Yun, Jun's right-hand man, who tells him to come in. Yoon Won enters the office and the man tells him to drop the formalities, as they can be casual when they are alone. So, the senior prosecutor turns on the television and asks if Yoon Hwan remembers the child kidnapping and murder case that happened in Dongnam 10 years ago. The news on TV reports that the suspect in the Dongnam case was finally caught after 10 years, thanks to the persistent reinvestigation by the prosecution. The man then comments that Dongnam is where that scumbag is, and Yoon Won confirms he heard our protagonist is in charge of the case. The senior prosecutor becomes furious and asks how he solved the sister's murder case, and now this one too, and Yoon Won confirms while wondering why Jong Sung hasn't returned his call yet. At this, the man reprimands him, saying that even when walking a dog, you have to teach it never to walk ahead of its master. He warns him that if he doesn't break that habit, it will become a major headache later, and Yoon Hwan just agrees that he will keep that in mind. The senior prosecutor then puts out his cigarette and says they can deal with that later, because what matters now is who will go up there and give the briefing, as that is the main event, and it doesn't matter how many people Kim Seo Jin arrests. The real star of the show is the one on the podium. With a confident smile, he asks if Seo Jin will be the one giving the briefing and says there's no chance a mere intern will bypass his superiors in a place like Dongnam. With that, he concludes that in the end, Kim Seo Jin just did all the hard work for someone else's credit, and Yoon Won agrees. While on television, a reporter announces that the prosecution will hold a briefing. However, suddenly, the two are completely shocked by what they see, because the person who takes the podium to give the briefing is our protagonist himself, who introduces himself and apologizes to the bereaved family and the public for not having solved the case for so long. Completely furious, the senior prosecutor slams the table and yells if the idiots at the Dongnam branch have gone crazy and why they would hand the briefing over to a kid like that. Yoon Won is furious to see that our protagonist's name is #1 on the real-time search trends. Comments about the case spread quickly, with people shocked by the number of victims and others praising our protagonist's appearance. The young man clenches his teeth in anger, completely frustrated with the situation. Our protagonist walks down the hall with an air of confidence and determination. Suddenly, someone calls him and puts a hand on his shoulder to congratulate him. It was his coworkers who praise him for a great job at the briefing, and with the winds of change, a different atmosphere begins to fill the Dongnam branch. With a slight smile, he thinks that for now, this may just be a gentle flutter of wings, but soon it will become a massive storm that will swallow Kim Young Jun whole. Suddenly, he receives a message from his friend Jung Woo, who says he will wait for him in the front parking lot. Our guy wonders why his friend wants to see him all of a sudden and heads to the exit. However, upon opening the door, he is blinded by camera flashes, and so he is immediately surrounded by a crowd of reporters who bombard him with questions about the case and if he has any secrets to solving such difficult cases. Suddenly, a small bird lands on his shoulder, and a female reporter asks what that is, leaving our protagonist confused. Seeing the bird, he is startled and screams in surprise, not knowing what to do. The comical moment is captured by the reporter's cameras, who do not miss the opportunity to record the scene. Meanwhile, across the street, his friend Jung Woo records everything with a smile and tells him to enjoy the fame, because since he lied to him, he will post the video on YouTube. From inside the office, the branch chief observes all the commotion outside. With a smile, he comments that seeing Kim Seo Jin reminds him of the old days when he used to dive headfirst into building a just society without a second thought. At this, he feels his prosecutor's blood, which he thought had dried up, boiling again, and his subordinate agrees, saying the quiet branch has finally become lively. The man named Kwon Young then says it seems the opportunity he had given up on has finally arrived and that it's time to go back to Seoul. With a mischievous smile, the branch chief asks him to set the stage for his return. The scene then shifts to a restaurant where everyone is making a toast, celebrating the recent events. At that dinner, which serves as both a welcome party for our protagonist and Lee So-hee, and a celebration for the formation of the special investigation team, he will finally shed the intern label tomorrow. The table is laden with expensive and well-decorated dishes. Our protagonist observes the high-quality sashimi and thinks he could never afford something like this when he was Sujun Jaeyoung, but today he will conquer it all. However, before he could eat, someone calls his name. It was Kim Kwon-young, the chief prosecutor of the 4th Criminal Division, who welcomes him and offers him a drink. He praises him, saying it's impressive to solve 2 important cases during his internship, but our protagonist humbly replies that he was just lucky, and the man laughs at his modesty. With a smile, our guy stands up and offers to pour him a drink as well. Kim Kwon-young raises his glass and says he looks forward to working with the young man. Our protagonist then replies that the pleasure is all his, and the two make a toast to to seal the new partnership. As he drinks, he has a sudden realization. He recalls a document from the Special Investigation Team for the Lee Jae-won serial killer case with his name written on it. In the memory, the branch chief says he will put Kim Seo-jin's name on the list, but that he plans to have him focus on something else. Kwon Young questions if he is trying to steal the boy's credit, but the man denies it and states that he will ensure the young man receives all the merit. The memory ends with the revelation that the real plan is to have our protagonist secretly go after a certain Park Sang-young, and the young man wonders who this person is. His new boss then places a hand on his shoulder and asks him to come to his office as soon as he arrives tomorrow, as they need to discuss something urgent about a case. Despite this, the man advises him not to think about work today and just enjoy the moment, saying goodbye with a "see you tomorrow." However, our protagonist can't relax and takes out his phone to search for the name Park Sang-young. The search reveals the profile of a businessman who is a manager at Hung Construction, and our guy finds it strange for such a young guy to have such a high position, besides finding his face strangely familiar. Suddenly, he finally remembers where he has seen that face before. It turns out that this Park Sang-young is a friend of his cousin, Kim Yun-won. Our protagonist drinks a little and thinks he doesn't know why someone like Park Sang-young is under investigation, but if he is connected to Kim Yun-won, things change. He then slams the glass on the counter with a dull thud. With a smile, he realizes that this could be his chance to finally finish them off once and for all. However, as he is about to eat again, someone calls his name and interrupts him. Someone yells for our protagonist to join them at the table, but the young man just watches in silence. The next morning, a new workday begins for the rookie. Arriving at his new boss's office, he greets him, and the man welcomes him. The boss then informs him that 2 more people are coming and asks him to sit and wait. Our protagonist waits patiently until someone knocks on the door. Shortly after, the door opens, revealing the arrival of the other 2 prosecutors. A man and a woman enter the place and ask if the boss called for them. Their presence catches our guy completely by surprise. He then recognizes his colleague Lee So, he and prosecutor Ji Dongmin with his 5 years of experience. The boss confirms that everyone has arrived and tells the 2 to sit down as well. Prosecutor Ji Dongmin approaches to introduce himself and comments that he heard our protagonist is a lucky guy. The young man is confused by the comment, and the man apologizes, saying he was just envious. However, our guy realizes that anyone can see that was pure sarcasm. He then concludes that the rumors about Ji Dongmin being a good person were false, and that the guy is actually a complete jinx. The boss calls for everyone's attention and warns that what he is about to say is strictly confidential before addressing our protagonist. The boss asks him to just put his name on the special investigation team while he handles other cases, but assures him that his performance will be recorded, and our protagonist agrees with the order. Thus, the boss gets straight to the point and asks if anyone there knows Park Sang-young. Our guy thinks that, as expected, it's about the Park Sang-young case, and that it was good to have researched him beforehand. Jae Dongmin says it's the first time he's heard that name, but Lee So, he states that she knows him if he is the manager of Hyung Construction. Our protagonist then explains that Hyung Construction became the preferred bidder for the Marine Park District 1 project, and that he heard manager Park Sang-young is at the center of it all. At this, the boss confirms that this is exactly why he called them there. The man then stands up and approaches a whiteboard to explain the situation. He explains that the Gangwon Urban Development Corporation returned the project and Hyung was selected as the preferred bidder, but they received information that there were unfair work instructions during the process, and so he orders the 3 of them to investigate the case from now on. The boss warns them to investigate discreetly, as the dust on a construction site disappears with just a little water. Jae Dongmin is chosen as the leader and vouches for the skills of the 2 rookies, but inside, he wonders if he can perform well as a leader with such exceptional juniors. A short time later, the meeting ends, and they leave the office. In the hallway, Ji Dongmin says he looks forward to working with the 2 of them. He then suggests they investigate the case individually first and then objectively analyze the overlapping parts, and our protagonist agrees with the plan. With a smile, the man places a hand on our guy's shoulder in a gesture of false camaraderie. With a mocking smile, Ji Dongmin calls him lucky and challenges him to see if he will be lucky this time too, which leaves our protagonist completely annoyed with that scumbag. Suddenly, upon being touched by the man, our protagonist feels something strange. His psychometry ability is activated, revealing a vision of the past. In the vision, he hears Ji Dongmin's voice on the phone arranging to meet Sang-young at a coffee shop near the Royal Chalice Apartments at 7 in the evening. Sang-young then explains that the place is private and safe, as it is not frequented by legal professionals. The vision ends with Ji Dongmin assuring that he will help Sang-young solve his problems. Back in the present, our protagonist is shocked and wonders if Ji Dongmin is conspiring with Park Sang-young, and realizes they have arranged to meet today. Beside him, Lee So, he comments that for some reason, she felt a strange chill. Our guy then asks asks about Ji Dongmin's reputation, and his colleague reveals that he is famous among the female staff for being a womanizer with many victims. The girl has a disgusted expression and says she hates guys like him who are trash and don't take responsibility for their actions. With an annoyed expression, she decides it's better not to delve too deep into the subject. Our protagonist then suggests they divide the investigation work, and his colleague agrees, finding the plan of working individually inefficient. He explains that if they divide the responsibilities and check if the official accepted bribes or received orders from above, they can finish everything much faster, and the girl agrees but wonders why Ji Dongmin suggested the opposite. With a slight smile, our guy replies that they should check that together too, and so he arranges to meet Lee So he after work and heads to his new office in room 507. Carrying a box of coffees, he arrives at his new room to meet his team. He then opens the door and prepares to introduce himself. Inside, a man stands up and greets him, introducing himself as Investigator Lim Jiangtaek. The other woman introduces herself as Officer Du Minji, and our protagonist greets them, bringing bribes so they will take good care of him in the future. They joke and ask if that is poison to make them work hard, and our guy confirms, saying his hobby is working overtime. His new colleagues are completely terrified and ask if he is serious. With a smile, he calms them down and says he also likes to have a life at night, inviting them for a drink before the coffee gets cold. They laugh in relief at the joke, but in the near future, Lim Jiangtaek would remember that first meeting as a moment full of lies and deception. The scene then shifts to a coffee shop near some buildings at night. The interior of the place is decorated with a huge pink teddy bear and an ornate bird cage. Our protagonist and Lee So he enter the cafe and she questions why he came there. The girl comments that he has a unique taste since there are many other cafes nearby, but our guy thinks it's because Park Sang-young and Ji Dongmin will probably meet there, although he can't reveal that yet. So he changes the subject and explains that he did some digging on manager Park Sang-young and suspects the involvement of a governor or city council member. However, as he talks about the scale of the case and how the money was delivered, his colleague's phone starts to ring. She apologizes for the interruption, but our protagonist reassures her and tells her to answer, as it might be urgent. The girl, however, ignores the call and says it's just her mother's routine check-in, and that she can call back later after work. And so, she continues the conversation and questions what the fact that Park Sang-young is friends with Kim Yun-won has to do with the case. Our protagonist then drops the bombshell, revealing that Kim Yun-won and prosecutor Ji Dongmin are also close senior and junior from college, which leaves her completely shocked. With that, he shows a photo on his phone from his cousin's private group where Ji Dongmin and Park Sang-young are commenting on the post. The girl is confused and says Ji Dongmin claimed not to know Park Sang-young and questions how he got into a private account, but our protagonist reveals that Kim Yun-won is his cousin. The revelation leaves her even more shocked, and the young man asks her not to make that face, as they are not the same kind of people. However, before she could say anything, a noise catches our protagonist's attention. He quickly pushes his colleague's head down to hide her from the view of who is coming. On the other side of the curtain, Park Sang-young comments on how private the place is and jokes that it would be misconstrued if two men came alone to a place like this. Ji Dongmin then points to the other couples hiding behind the curtains and comments that it must be exciting. Crouched down, our protagonist confirms to his colleague that the people who just entered are prosecutor Ji Dongmin and manager Park Sang-young, and thinks the timing of the coincidence is impeccable. With her face covered in cake, the girl says she understands and asks him to take his hand off her head, and our guy apologizes and offers a napkin. From there, he suggests they move to the next seat to collect evidence, and his colleague questions if he is going to record them or something. With her face still dirty, the girl warns him that recording third-party conversations without consent is illegal and violates the Communication Secrets Protection Act. With a smirk, our protagonist agrees that it would be illegal wiretapping if he simply left a recorder, but wonders what would happen if the recording was made accidentally during a date, and thinks that was the main reason he asked her out. The girl gets all flustered at the idea of a date, but our protagonist says he will go first, and that she should come after she cleans her face. As he walks to the other seat, he thinks that the place has no soundproofing, so recording is possible, but they can't get caught under any circumstances. At the other table, Ji Dongmin announces he's going to the restroom for a moment. This leaves our protagonist completely terrified of the possibility. He tenses up as he absolutely cannot get caught right there. However, the person approaching is just Park Sang-young. At this, the young man lets out a sigh of relief and thinks thinks that guy has the look of a gigolo. Park Sang-young then apologizes for interrupting the flow of their conversation. Now seated and with the phone recording, they hear Park Sang-young ask why he is a suspect. Jae Dongmin gets straight to the point and questions if he has ever bribed a public official, and the man replies that this is just normal business, as you have to grease some palms to get things moving faster. The man continues, saying it's the fault of the slow officials and wonders why he is being investigated for something so small. Our protagonist's colleague is disgusted and calls him a complete scumbag. Jae Dongmin explains that the Gangwon Do Urban Development Corporation returned the project and his company was chosen, and questions who he bribed. Park Sang-young gets annoyed and asks if this is an interrogation, but the other denies it and says he just needs to know what he did. And so, the man confesses that he met a councilman, put a girl next to him, and gave him money, and sarcastically asks if he also wants the list of what they drank and ate, while the girl tries to get our protagonist's attention. At this, Park Sang-young tells him to forget the details and just keep him updated on what the prosecutors are planning. He then promises that if everything ends well, he will get Ji Dong-min out of that exile in the next reshuffle, leaving the prosecutor completely surprised. With a mocking smile, the man questions if he thought he didn't know anything and reveals he also knows that Ji Dong-min suddenly started hanging around Yoon Won. From there, he reminds him that the two are close and that Dong-min is forming his own team and offers to put in a good word for him. Jae Dong-min immediately agrees and tells him not to worry and just trust him, and the man praises him for catching on quickly. Shortly after, the two leave the cafe together, the deal finally sealed. As soon as they leave, our protagonist stops the recording on his phone. He then says he now has a general idea of the situation and that he thought Ji Dong-min was just dirty with women, but he's into all sorts of filth, and the girl questions how he knew the two would come here. With a slight smile, our guy reveals that he happened to overhear prosecutor Ji Dong-min on the phone. His colleague is surprised and wonders if he is really just a lucky guy, but our protagonist replies that luck is also a skill. The girl then composes herself and suggests they start by investigating the connection between Park Sang-young and the councilman he mentioned. However, our protagonist interrupts her and explains that as soon as Park Sang-young hears about the investigation through Jae Dong-min, the first thing he will do is erase all traces. At this, his colleague becomes worried and questions what they should do now. With a confident smile, our guy states that the plan is quite simple. From there, he reveals that they just need to stir up the dust again, and the scene shifts to a get-together dinner of the Dongnam County Orchestra. Inside, the county councilman Wei Jun-sang, all flushed from being drunk, approaches a girl and asks if their Yoon Jong isn't from Wonju. The young woman confirms uncomfortably, as the man puts his arm around her and tells her to think of him as her hometown big brother and to feel at ease. At this, he even insists the girl call him Oppa at least once, and she is completely speechless with disgust at the situation. The councilman continues to harass the young woman, saying that the younger sisters from his city are the most beautiful, and asks for her number so they can meet for meals more often. The girl bites her lip, completely annoyed and unsure what to do. Wei Jun-sang playfully threatens her, saying that if she doesn't greet him tomorrow, he will be sulky, but a coworker tries to intervene, saying the councilman seems to have had a bit too much to drink. That leaves the man completely furious with the young man, and so, he calls him a punk and says the boy doesn't even know how to read the room. Another older man stands up and yells for the young man to apologize to the councilman immediately, and the boy obeys in fear. Wei Jun-sang stands up saying he's lost his appetite, and tells the head of the culture department to get rid of the boy while he goes to the restroom. The tension in the restaurant gets even thicker with the man's departure. In the restroom, the councilman washes his hands and complains about the punk who dared to lecture him, thinking about how he will cut his budget to get revenge. Suddenly, a mop appears and blocks the restroom door. The man turns around, confused, not understanding what is happening. Kim Seo-jin then reveals himself and greets him, leaving the councilman furious, asking who the heck he is to block the door like that. With a slight smile, our protagonist introduces himself as Prosecutor Kim Seo-jin from the Dongnam branch and says he has an urgent question for the councilman. The man immediately recognizes him from the news and stammers in terror, asking what a prosecutor is doing there. Without beating around the bush, the young man gets straight to the point and questions if he knows Park Sang-young from Hyunj Construction, which leaves him in shock. The mere mention of the name makes the councilman panic and remember when he was partying with this Sang-young, wondering if that psycho got caught. However, he tries to calm himself and thinks that maybe the young man is just bluffing lying without any concrete proof and that he shouldn't let himself get carried away. And so, the councilman plays dumb and with a forced smile states that he has no idea who Park Sang-young is or what the prosecutor is talking about. Kim Seo-jin tells him to stop pretending and states that there are signs of bribery, and the man despairs, demanding proof and claiming he has always lived a clean life. At this, the councilman becomes furious and accuses our protagonist of being a political prosecutor who spreads rumors to get a better position, boasting about his party affiliation. With that, he pushes our guy and says that if he wants to interrogate him, he should follow the proper procedures. The man tries to open the door but complains that the darn door won't open, while our protagonist just watches him calmly. Outside, one of his subordinates approaches and asks if he is leaving already. The coworker tries to apologize for what happened earlier, but the councilman tells him to shut up and tells everyone to finish eating and leave. Two women at the table comment on the commotion, and one of them says she doesn't know what happened but that the man's departure is a relief. The young man who was humiliated earlier sees our protagonist's feet passing by him and is completely surprised. As Kim Seo-jin crosses the restaurant, people recognize him and wonder if that isn't the famous druid prosecutor. Someone in the crowd recognizes him as the so-called Snow White prosecutor. Our protagonist turns and asks where they got that weird nickname, but upon touching the shoulder of the girl who was being harassed, his eyes glow and his psychometry ability is activated. He then has a vision of Councilman Wee Jun-sang inviting the young woman to rest with him alone. The vision continues with the man threatening her and saying that if she refuses, the other band members will have their budget cut. Back in the present, the girl is visibly shaken by what just happened, and our protagonist apologizes to her. He now understands that what he saw was exactly what happened between her and that scumbag moments before. A short time later, outside the restaurant, someone calls the young man and informs him that Wee Jun-sang has started to move. On the phone, our guy deduces that the man will probably try to clear all important evidence that night and tells the investigator to follow him closely, as people in a hurry always leave something behind. Inside a car, investigator Lim Jeong-taek complains that the coffee he got earlier was poison and promises himself a life with dinners starting tomorrow. Our protagonist ends the call, asking to be contacted immediately if anything happens. Shortly after, he approaches the girl who was leaving and asks for a moment of her attention. The young woman is startled and calls him Prosecutor Snow White, and he formally introduces himself, asking if she has a moment to talk. He then gets straight to the point and says he would like to ask her some questions about Councilman Wee Jun-sang, and her reaction surprises him. Terrified, the girl asks why he wants to talk to her, and our protagonist suggests she can talk to Prosecutor Lee So he if it's too difficult for her. His colleague Lee So he approaches and assures her that her anonymity as a public interest whistleblower will be fully protected. Our protagonist takes the girl's hand and leads her to his colleague Lee So he then comforts her and tells her not to be afraid and to tell them everything, as they will help her. Given the support, the girl finally gathers her courage and decides to tell the truth. In a coffee shop, the young woman asks if her anonymity will really be guaranteed. Lee So he promises it will and begins to listen to the girl's testimony. Outside, our protagonist waits and takes the opportunity to research his new nickname. He is completely shocked to see the search terms related to Prosecutor Snow White, and so he discovers a YouTube video with 800,000 views titled The Chilling Parallel Theory of Prosecutor Kim Seo-jin, with comments calling him a combination of a prosecutor and a druid. He then sees that the video was posted by his friend Lee Jung-woo and finally understands why people were whispering about him. Completely furious, the young man vows to get revenge on his friend, and suddenly his colleague calls him, announcing they are finished. She questions why he was waiting outside in the cold, and our protagonist explains that he thought there would be things she wouldn't want to say in front of him. The girl is a little impressed by his consideration and says that Ms. Yoon Jung has already left through the back door as a precaution. With a sigh of relief, our protagonist colleague comments that this Wee Jun-sang is an even more disgusting scumbag than she thought, as he harassed all the young women in the orchestra. However, she assures that it ends now, as Ms. Yoon Jung has promised to gather the other victims and file a formal complaint. Our protagonist celebrates the news, and his colleague says she can't forgive scumbags who commit crimes like this just because they have power, and so he calls her to go, and the girl is confused, not knowing where. With a confident smile, the young man shows a message on his phone and says he needs to teach Officer Wee Jun-sang a lesson, as the disposable phone he planted has finally been turned on. A short time later, in a wooded area at night, the two meet with the investigators who were following the councilman. One of the investigators hands a completely burned hard drive to our protagonist. He explains that about 10 minutes after Wee Jun-sang entered his house, the man they caught came out terrified, looking around everywhere. The investigator continues, saying the guy looked very suspicious, so he followed him and found him burning the hard drive, and the terrified man apologizes. Our guy then turns to the suspect and questions if that hard drive belongs to Wee Jun-sang. The terrified man confesses that he was instructed to swap his hard drive with the councilman's hands and that he had no choice, and our protagonist concludes it was a typical evidence destruction scheme. However, he is intrigued because if the data was so vital, why did the man order it to be burned? And he questions if it was the councilman who told him to burn the hard drive. The man explains that he was supposed to keep it well hidden until the end of the investigation, but that he should burn it if he thought he would be caught. And since it was just a matter of time, he decided to burn it right away. Desperate, he begs the young man to keep what happened that night a secret, and our protagonist agrees to keep an eye on him for now. Seeing the completely burnt hard drive, our protagonist's colleague comments that things were going too well and questions if they will be able to recover the data. He then explains that with that level of damage, it would be difficult to do it at the branch, and they would have to send it to the Gangwon District Prosecutor's office, but sending it to headquarters might be too risky. With a determined look, our protagonist states that since the opponent is a politician, it's better to act assuming the worst-case scenario, and that he will handle the matter himself. Our protagonist's colleague is impressed by his ability, but the young man explains that of course, he won't do it alone. With a slight smile, he says he thinks he knows someone who can help, and so he sends a message to a certain Jaeyoung Yu, asking for help. A short time later at the Dongnam police station, a police officer analyzes the hard drive and says he won't know until he tries. He explains that if the internal damage isn't as bad as it seems, it might be possible to recover the data, and our protagonist friend reassures him, saying that Officer Park is the most skilled expert at the station. Officer Park says it will take about 2 hours and asks our guy to buy him some fried chicken later, and his friend already takes out his phone to place the order, and so the expert tells them to let him know when the chicken arrives and starts working on the hard drive. Our protagonist thanks his friend for saving him from that situation. With a playful smile, the officer tells him not to worry and that they are even with that Prosecutor Snow White story. Our guy just sighs at the joke, and his friend says he just wanted the best for him, and the two joke about the chicken delivery. Sometime later, Officer Park hands a flash drive to our protagonist and reveals that the damage was minimal, and he managed to recover everything, even the deleted files. Back in his office, our guy prepares to analyze the folders organized by year. He then wonders what is hidden inside that little Pandora's box and clicks on a file from February 7th. Seeing the contents, he is completely shocked and finally understands why Jun Sang was so confident. The reason was his connection to high-ranking politicians, and the file reveals a list of bribes that Jun Sang offered to Governor Lee Si-mun and Assemblyman Il-seep. Governor Lee Si-mun is known as the Lord of Gangwon Province. Il-seep is a former judge who became an assemblyman. Our protagonist realizes that if the case had gone to headquarters, Chief Prosecutor Cho Yong-jun would have used it to boost his political career. Because of this, he concludes that with his current status and only the contents of that flash drive, it would be very difficult to arrest the two men, as they are extremely powerful. He recalls his tragic past and knows that if he acts recklessly, he will end up repeating his miserable fate. Faced with the situation, he decides to close the case with just Councilman Jun Sang for now and removes the flash drive from the computer. With a determined smile, our guy puts the device away, as he will use it when the time is right, as the first key to entering the center of power. A short time later, his colleague Lee he approaches and asks if he managed to fix the hard drive. The young man lies, saying it didn't work and that he just sent it to headquarters, and the girl sighs, stating that nothing is easy. Suddenly, a voice interrupts them, asking if everyone was there. It was Prosecutor Ji Dongmin, who approaches with a smile and suggests they have an informational meeting that night. With a superior air, he tells the two to bring their findings, as he will also share his. As soon as the man walks away, our protagonist's colleague complains that he won't share any information, and that he will just run to tell Park Sang-young everything. The girl then questions what they are going to do, and the young man says that, for now, they will just listen to what he has to say. He insists and asks what will happen after they listen, and with a confident smile, our protagonist replies that he will think about it when the time comes. At the meeting, Ji Dongmin begins by explaining that they discovered that Park Sang-young sent money to Assemblyman Jun Sang, but since everything was formally reported, it's difficult to classify it as a bribe. The boss then questions if the money was indeed formally declared, and Ji Dongmin confirms that it was, as everything was registered as a legitimate political donation. At this, the boss asks Prosecutor Ji Dongmin to proceed with his explanation. Next, it's Lee He's turn to present her findings, and she reveals that a significant number of public officials received 500,000 won gift certificates from friends who happened to work for Hyunji Construction. At this, Ji Dongmin sighs and mentions the Kim Young-ran act. The boss then asks Lee So-hee to explain the law, and she clarifies that any public official who receives more than 1 million won at once or 3 million per year will face criminal punishment, and that they can receive gift certificates of up to 500,000 won 6 times, as long as it's not a direct bribe. The boss gets a bit impatient and says he doesn't need every little detail, but asks the chief prosecutor to continue. Ji Dongmin explains that Hyunji Construction claims to have distributed the gift certificates to the employees who were forced to move because of the construction, and that some of them gifted their acquaintances who coincidentally were public officials, which makes the situation complicated. With a confident smile, the man reveals the crucial point of the matter and says that all the public officials who received the gift certificates currently hold positions that have no relation to the business. Our protagonist observes the scene and thinks that these scumbags are experienced and know how to exploit the loopholes in the law. He then reflects on each of the public officials who received the gift certificates. Ji Dongmin continues, explaining that they all previously worked in departments relevant to construction, such as urban development and regeneration, but since they entered the administrative career, they change positions constantly. At this, our protagonist states that although there is no connection with their official duties, the circumstances are sufficient to raise a reasonable suspicion. The young man then reveals the final piece of the puzzle and says that Assemblyman Wai Junsang, who received sponsorship from Park Sang-young, recently sponsored 6 assemblymen from the Dachin party with 5 million won each and suggests they follow the money trail. Ji Dongmin clenches his fist, completely furious with the rookie's audacity, and thinks how the spoiled brat dares to speak like that, before telling Kim Seo-jin to listen carefully. Ji Dongmin gets annoyed and slams the table, stating that the Gangwon Urban Development Corporation gave up the project to reduce debts and that Hyunji Construction only invested to increase its brand value. Our protagonist finds all this very strange because since his father owns a construction company, he did some digging and found out that the Marine Park project would not cause any financial burden. With this, the young man realizes that Ji Dongmin knows the truth very well, but still continues to defend the lie shamelessly. Kim Seo-jin then confronts him directly and asks if he wanted to escape this place that badly, which leaves Ji Dongmin completely in shock. Our protagonist presses play on the recording he made at the cafe, and Park Sang-young's voice echoes through the room, telling Ji Dongmin to just regularly report what the prosecution is investigating. The recording continues with the promise that if everything ends well, he will get him out of that place of exile. On the tape, Park Sang-young's voice reminds him that he is close to Yoon Won, and that since he is forming his own team, he could get a spot for Ji Dongmin. Completely terrified, Ji Dongmin breaks out in a cold sweat upon hearing his own voice on the recording agreeing to trust the plan. The audio continues to expose the entire conspiracy, with Park Sang-young asking to be kept informed about the investigations. At this, Ji Dongmin has a desperate smile on his face and wonders how the heck the rookie got that recording. Completely cornered, he tries to defend himself, saying it's all just a misunderstanding. While inside, he curses Kim Seo-jin for tricking him. The branch chief stares at him with a serious expression and questions if that is really a misunderstanding. Ji Dongmin stammers in terror and assures that it is, as he can explain everything, and claims he was just trying to get information from Park Sang-young. However, the boss cuts him off abruptly and says that's enough of that performance. And so, he turns to our protagonist and Lee So-hee and asks the two of them to leave the room, as he will handle the rest alone. The office door closes and Ji Dongmin is left behind, completely defeated and alone to face the consequences of his actions. In the hallway, his colleague questions if he really needed to play the recording right at that moment. Our protagonist just stares at her with a serious expression, without saying a word. The girl continues and says he should have been more careful, as now it seems like they set up a targeted attack. At this, she warns him that if he gets a reputation as a rookie who takes down his superiors, he will be hated in an instant. With a slight smirk, the young man notices her concern and asks, "Looking at my face, I obviously had something in mind, didn't I?" He then reassures her and tells her not to worry, as that will never happen, but the girl sighs and questions what makes him so sure. And so, our guy asks if she knows why the chief prosecutor was exiled to Dongnam. In a flashback, he explains that a few years ago, there was a sponsorship scandal that shook the country, where a chief prosecutor received a massive bribe from a real estate developer to close an investigation. At this, the young man questions if she knows who caught that chief prosecutor, and the girl is completely shocked by the revelation. He then reveals that it was Chief Prosecutor Kim Kwon-young who was labeled as the junior who took down his superior and ended up being exiled there. With this, our protagonist explains that the man is the person who would understand their situation better than anyone and wouldn't stand by watching them go through the same thing. And the girl finally understands his point of view. The young man concludes that the boss will probably just get rid of Ji Dongmin and close the matter quietly. While waiting for the elevator, he explains that if the chief prosecutor prosecutor interferes personally, it will cause a scene, and that's why he will use prosecutor Lee Mung-soo's hands. With a confident smile, our guy finishes by saying that the boss will just tell him to clean up the mess. A short time later, in a restaurant, Chief Prosecutor Kim Kwon-young orders Lee Mung-soo to clean up all the mess caused by Jae Dongmin. And so, at a dinner with our protagonist and his colleague, Lee Myung-soo assures that he will make Dongmin leave his position quietly. He is completely shocked to see that our guy's prediction has come true and wonders if he is some kind of psychic. While the young man just gives a smirk, Lee Mung-soo then turns to the two young prosecutors with an important warning. At this, he instructs them to forget everything that happened, as only those present and the chief prosecutor know about the incident, and the two agree to keep it a secret. With a smile, the man raises his glass and suggests they just eat and forget the matter for now. From there, the prosecutors make a toast together to seal the pact of silence about the situation. The night continues with a lot of drinks on the table, showing that the serious conversation has given way to a more relaxed moment. Lee Myung-soo ends up drinking too much and completely relaxes, while he watches the scene, a bit embarrassed. Later in a dark alley, Chief Prosecutor Kim Kwon-young calls Prosecutor Kim for a chat, and with an apologetic tone, says they need to drop the case. He explains that the information has already leaked because of Jae Dongmin and that the dust at the crime scene has already settled, making the investigation useless from that point on. However, our protagonist confidently states that he can solve the case, while his boss lights a cigarette thoughtfully. The young man insists, saying he wants to turn Park Sang-young's arrogant voice into a cry of desperation and begs to be allowed to finish what he started. With a smile, the chief prosecutor says our guy reminds him of himself when he was younger, and because of that, he decides to give him a chance. However, he imposes a condition and warns that if they are going to do this, they must finish off the enemy completely, leaving no loose ends. Article 11 of the Constitution of the Republic of Korea states that all are equal before the law, but since some people clearly exist above it, our protagonist will no longer insist on playing fair in this life. With a wicked smile, he remembers his greatest enemy, Kim Young-jun, and the first method he chose, it will be to use trash to clean up trash, and he wonders if he can start the big cleanup now. A short time later, he arrives at an office and greets a female employee, who is startled and asks who he is. Without paying much attention to the woman, he says he is there to see Assemblyman Il-seep and passes by her before she can stop him. The young man enters the room and finds the Assemblyman playing a game of mini-golf, who is completely shocked by the intrusion. The employee follows him and announces the visit, and our guy formally introduces himself as Prosecutor Kim Seo-jin from the Dongnam branch. The man is suspicious and tries to dismiss him, saying he is busy, but our protagonist insists that he will need to make time. With a smile, he subtly threatens him and says it's better for him to cooperate if he wants to receive his nomination safely this time. A short time later, the two are already sitting and talking with a cup of tea on the table. The assemblyman questions if it's true that Wee Jun-sang kept an expense diary, and our protagonist confirms that the file has all the details, including dates, amounts, and even the banks. That leaves the man furious, because with the general election approaching, he can't have this kind of problem, and at this, he asks who else knows about the matter. The young man takes a sip of his tea and replies that no one else knows, because if they did, the prosecution would have officially summoned him instead of him coming personally. The assemblyman stares at him for a moment and, realizing the situation, gets straight to the point and asks what he wants. The man laughs and says he understands the game, asking if our protagonist also wants to leave Dongnam and offering help to transfer him to Seoul, but the young man slams the cup on the table with force. Our protagonist interrupts him and, with a firm tone, says that actually, he is the one who will send the assemblyman to Seoul. The man is completely paralyzed by the young man's audacity. At this, he turns, completely shocked, and questions who is sending whom where. The assemblyman bursts into laughter and calls him an arrogant brat, wanting to know what kind of backing he has to act with such confidence. Our guy then mentions the name of Jo Son-bong, a member of the National Assembly for Seoul who is a 4-term veteran and the big shot of the region. He slides an envelope across the table and reveals that the man's love for his son is quite excessive. The assemblyman takes the envelope and is completely shocked upon seeing the contents. Our protagonist explains that Jo Son-bong's son wrote an article on biotechnology and got into university through the special admission system. However, the boy's math grades were a total disaster, and he was exempted from military service for a herniated disc, but his hobby is practicing extreme sports, and to top it off, he passed a super difficult recruitment with a very low score. The assemblyman is shocked and asks how he investigated all that, but our protagonist says the most important thing is something else. The young man then reminds him that if he leaks that information, he will be able to advance to the central political stage. The man says the proposal is interesting and that he felt tempted but needs to think a little, and our guy knows he won't take long, as Siap is a greedy man. At this, the assemblyman gets straight to the point and asks what he wants in return, but our protagonist replies that, for now, he wants nothing. With a smile, he thinks that what he wants has already begun, as his plan is to slowly tame Assemblyman Siap using the puppet strings he has placed, disguised as wings. The assemblyman then says he can't just accept that for free, and that he would like to give him a small separate gift. In a restaurant, a man pours a drink for another while asking what he wants him to do with Wei Junsang. Elsewhere, a man squeezes 2 walnuts in his hand tightly. He then turns to Wei Junsang and questions if he is writing a diary, and the man tries to play dumb. However, the assemblyman says he heard a rumor in the prosecution that his name is in the so-called diary, which leaves Wei Junsang completely terrified. The man throws himself to his knees and begs for mercy. The assemblyman then orders him to confess that he received a bribe from Park Sang-young and to end it all at once. Desperate, Wei Junsang drops a pile of papers on the floor and continues to beg to be spared. The assemblyman picks up the documents and is completely shocked upon seeing the contents. The paperwork reveals all the money he embezzled and the inside information he used. With the walnuts in his hand, the man explains that in politics, you can't trust anyone, and that's why he was watching him closely. Wei Junsang continues to beg, but the assemblyman threatens him, saying he has a daughter to marry off, and that he won't want to rot in jail for 10 years. With that, the man tells him to go to jail hand in hand with Park Sang-young, while Wei Junsang prostrates himself on the floor, completely defeated. A short time later, Park Sang-young is arrested and shouts indignantly, asking if they know who he is. As he is dragged away, the man shouts his name and threatens them, asking if they think they will get away with this. Liso, he approaches and tells him to shut up with an intimidating look. As Park Sang-young is taken away by the investigators, his colleague Liso, he watches the whole scene with a serious expression. At this, the girl turns to our protagonist and questions where he is going so suddenly, and he replies that he's just popping over to Seoul. The young man says he will be back tomorrow afternoon, and asks her to take care of Wei Junsang while he is away, and then hands her a lollipop to recharge her energy, leaving the girl surprised by the gesture. As she unwraps the candy, our protagonist says he has one more favor to ask of her. With a mysterious look, he whispers for her to do what that guy wants, because either way, things won't go as he plans. Suddenly, Park Sang-young remembers seeing our protagonist at the cafe where he met with Ji Dongmin. The man yells and accuses him of setting it all up, but our guy just waves and says goodbye, asking her to take care of everything. The girl is left behind, thoughtful, and wonders what he meant by do what the man wants. A short time later, the scene shifts to interrogation room number 302. Inside, Park Sang-young complains that the alcohol hasn't worn off yet, and says he will wait for the lawyer to arrive to discuss the matter. In front of Lee So-hee, he complains and asks if this isn't an exaggeration, as the donation was legitimate and declared, and now he is being treated like a criminal. The girl then reveals that Wei Junsang confessed everything, and that besides the donations, the boxes they exchanged at the golf course were all recorded by security cameras. The man tries to defend himself, saying it was just a gift, but our protagonist's colleague cuts him off and states that Wei Junsang has already testified that the boxes contain stacks of cash. At this, he despairs and accuses her of acting solely based on what Wei Junsang said, and questions where the presumption of innocence is. Liso, he stares at him coldly and asks how long he thinks he can deny all this, and the man finally gives up and asks to make a call. At this, he is thoughtful about her colleague's strategy. In a flashback, she remembers our protagonist's words to do what Park Sang-young wanted, as things wouldn't go as he expected. The girl lets out a sigh, still processing her partner's bold plan, and so, she places the man's phone on the table and says that at least he understands what he was told. Park Sang-young picks up the phone and calls Yoon Ho-won, informing him that he has been dragged to the prosecution office. As the man complains about being busy, the girl crosses her arms and thinks how he can be so busy if he was just drinking at the bar. He then asks Yoon Ho-won to give a message to his father, as they had a meeting scheduled for next week. On the other end of the line, the voice repeats Park Sang-young's name seriously. The man is completely shocked to hear the person on the other side ask why she would meet with his father. It turns out that the person on the call was Kim Young-jun, our protagonist's uncle, and Park Sang-young calls him Your Excellency. Completely terrified, the scene shifts to Chief Prosecutor Kim Young-jun's house, where someone informs him of a visitor's arrival. Our protagonist enters the place and informs his uncle that he has something to tell him. Kim Young-jun asks if Yoon Won has arrived yet, as our guy sits in front of him. At that moment, his cousin Kim Yoon-won appears and greets him, saying it's been a long time since they've seen each other. The young man sits down and mocks our protagonist, saying he solved a cold case and became a star, and our guy just replies it was luck, while the other asks for some of that luck for himself. Kim Young-jun asks what the matter is, and our protagonist turns to his cousin with a warning. Our guy then presses play on the recording of Park Sang-young and Ji Dongmin once again. The audio reveals the conversation about the promise to get him out of exile if everything ended well, and Yoon Hwan wonders why he suddenly approached him. The recording continues with the offer to put Ji Dongmin on Yoon Hwan's team, which leaves our protagonist's cousin completely shocked. Our protagonist then explains that Park Sang-young is Yoon Hwan's friend and is being held for bribing a local councilman, but that his cousin is being used as a bargaining chip. Yoon Hwan becomes furious and tells our guy not to interfere, as he will handle the matter himself. With a shake of his head, our protagonist comments on how his cousin is too kind to get rid of a scumbag like Park Sang-young. With a cynical smile, he says he was worried and decided to visit his uncle before things got worse, because after all, they are family. Yoon Hwan tries to defend himself, but his father cuts him off with a sharp gesture. Kim Young-jun stares at him with a deadly look and asks how he dares to spread his name around like that. The young man tries to explain, but suddenly his phone starts to ring. The caller ID reveals it's Park Sang-young calling once again. Our protagonist's cousin is completely terrified by the unexpected situation. His father then tells him to answer the call so everyone can hear. With the phone on speaker, Park Sang-young's voice echoes through the room, informing him that he has been dragged to the prosecution office. Yoon Hwan panics and begs his friend to shut up, as his father is listening to everything. Kim Young-jun's voice repeats Park Sang-young's name and asks why he would meet with his father. On the other end of the line, the man recognizes the voice and calls him Your Excellency. Completely terrified by the situation, Kim Young-jun coldly informs him that his company will be raided soon, leaving Park Sang-young in complete despair. The man continues the threat, saying his funds will be frozen, his operations halted, and any hidden corruption will be exposed in the media, and the man on the other end of the line starts begging for forgiveness. With a threatening tone, Kim Young-jun tells him to confess everything, serve his time, and get out of jail if he wants to keep his father's company safe, and warns him to stop spreading useless rumors. Park Sang-young gets the message and hangs up the phone. Completely defeated, our protagonist then stands up and says he wanted to have dinner with them, but now it will be difficult and that he will see them later. With a cynical smile, Kim Young-jun reminds him that he must delete the recording. Our guy smiles back with an innocent expression. He then takes out his phone and presses the button to permanently delete the recording while confirming that, of course, he will delete the file. From inside the house, you can hear Kim Young-jun's shouts reprimanding his son, and Yoon Hwan begging for forgiveness. Outside, our protagonist comments on how lively the scene is and thinks that a single recording won't take down Kim Yoon-hwan, but it's better to keep it safe just in case. He then opens his phone and accesses the cloud where the file is saved and thinks how convenient the cloud function really is. Suddenly, he receives a message from his colleague Lee So, who questions where he is and when he will be back. On the phone, our protagonist replies that he will be there around 4 and advises her to ask prosecutor Lee Myung-soo for help if things get difficult, as it's a lot for her to handle alone. With a smile, he apologizes and promises to hurry, asking her to hang in there just a little longer. He then explains that the reason he hasn't returned to the district office yet is related to Assemblyman Jo Son-bong, who has held his position in the Songpa-jang district for 4 terms. Political reporters say that as long as Jo Son-bong stays in power, it's impossible for a new figure to emerge in that district. At this, our protagonist's plan is to turn Assemblyman Seep into a sniper to expose all of Jo Son-bong's corruption. He thinks that if everything goes as planned, they will plant Seep in Songpa-jang and put him at the forefront of a power struggle, but he knows there might be unforeseen variables or a counter-attack from Jo Son-bong. Because of this, he reveals that there is someone he needs to meet that day to ensure the success of his plan. A man arrives at the location and asks if he is late, and our protagonist reveals that this person is Woo Jin-wook, Jo Son-bong's aide. The two formally introduce themselves, and our guy explains that as everyone knows, Woo Jin-wook is Assemblyman Jo Son-bong's aide. Assemblyman Jo Son-bong has 2 aides, his right-hand man, Lee Sang-ju, and his left-hand man, Woo Jin-wook. However, the politician is famous for openly favoring Lee Sang-ju, and if Jo Son-bong falls, Lee Sang-ju would be the next candidate, which makes our protagonist choose Woo Jin-wook as his ally. With this, he devises a 2-pronged strategy where Assemblyman Seep attacks from the outside, while aide Woo Jin-wook engages in hand-to-hand combat from the inside, and thus, not even Assemblyman Jo Son-bong will be able to resist. At the table, Woo Jin-wook asks our protagonist to be brief, as with the general election approaching, he is very busy. The man then questions if this is a request or a report. Woo Jin-wook dismisses the possibility of blackmail, as his boss's style is to counter-attack even stronger, and our protagonist questions if that's why prosecutors usually get in touch. The man says that since our guy is a prosecutor, he can say whatever he wants, as he will eat while he listens, and our protagonist wonders if he has been starving for days. Our guy then explains that it's none of the 3 options, and that he contacted him because he was curious about him. As he eats, the man is surprised and wonders why. Our protagonist then invites him for a drink so they can talk better. The man accepts just 1 glass, and our guy thinks it's a waste, as he has met many politicians, but this is the first one so relaxed. As he pours the drink, he reflects that the man is capable enough to handle most of Jo-seon Bong's work, but that seemed to be his limit, which is a shame. With a determined look, our protagonist thinks that what he needs now is not a kind and capable person, but someone ambitious who can really win. He then confronts him directly and asks how long he plans to stay like that, as he also doesn't like traitors, and questions if he will stay under Jo-seon Bong's orders forever. The man wipes his mouth and reveals that he is also thinking of leaving soon. At this, he confesses that in the next general election he is eyeing a tough district under the People's Party, and that maybe even someone like him can get nominated. But our protagonist says he will just waste money doing that. The man simply replies no. With a confident smile, he reveals that there is a way to get what he wants. Our protagonist remembers the electoral battles that followed, and how they were so filthy that his skin crawled just thinking about them. With a smirk, he thinks that just because the man hit his claws doesn't mean he isn't a predator. In front of the man, our protagonist transforms into a tiger, and Woo Jin-wook asks him to stop that and get straight to the point, but the young man just says the plan has changed, and so he slams the bottle on the table with a dull thud. Without beating around the bush, the young man gets straight to the point and reveals that he wants to support Woo Jin-wook's personal ambitions by swapping Il-seep's card for his. Our protagonist explains that Il-seep has many enemies and can be taken down at any moment because of his corruption, while Woo Jin-wook is well-liked, capable, and has an impeccable electoral strategy. At this, he assures that with his help, victory is more than possible, but the man is confused by the mention of personal goals. The young man then formally introduces himself as Kim Seo-jin, the son of Kim Jun-man, the CEO of Jaesong Construction. The revelation leaves Woo Jin-wook completely shocked, and our protagonist apologizes for having investigated him a little. He then reveals that he heard the man practically took care of all the district's affairs, and yet Assemblyman Jo-seon Bong plans to hand everything over to aide Lee Sang-ju. With this, he confronts him directly and questions why he is the one leaving for another place after having cultivated Songpa-jong for decades. Woo Jin-wook gets annoyed and says that is absurd, questioning if he is telling him to betray his boss. Seeing the reaction, our protagonist just tells him to leave, and the man is silent for a moment. Completely furious, Woo Jin-wook slams his fist on the table and yells for him to get out of there immediately. The young man stands up to leave and thinks that the man is suspicious of the situation, but if he really hated the idea, he would have stood up and left first, and because of this, he says he will wait for his call. However, before he could leave, Woo Jin-wook calls him and asks him to wait. The man then questions why he is helping him. With a confident smile, our protagonist replies that it's because he believes Woo Jin-wook can win, and that's the only reason. The aide is silent at the table, processing the young man's words, and the name Kim Seo-jin echoes in his mind. He then realizes that the young prosecutor saw through everything he had perfectly hidden, even while enduring Jo-seon Bong's humiliations. At this, the man drinks in one go and thinks that is not the look of a rookie. Woo Jin-wook slams the glass on the table with force, seeming to have made an important decision. The scene then shifts to the National Assembly building. Inside, Lee Sang-ju, the other aide, questions where he went and reminds him that today was the district tour. The man replies that it can't be and that he made the schedule himself, and that there was plenty of time before saying he briefly met someone. Lee Sang-ju reveals that the assemblyman asked for him earlier, which leaves Woo Jin-wook a bit surprised. With a smile, the other aide places a hand on his shoulder and says he covered for him, claiming he was taking care of party committee matters, and advises him to stick to the same story. Woo Jin-wook just thanks his colleague for his help. Suddenly, someone calls Lee Sang-ju's name in the hallway. The man walks away and tells him to use some mouthwash, as his breath smells of alcohol. As he watches his colleague walk away, Woo Jin-wook thinks that if he betrays them, Sang-ju will have nowhere to go, and so he walks down the hall and decides he can't betray a friend who has suffered by his side for so long. He thinks that if he just holds on quietly and leaves later, he can find his own path while getting a glass of water, but suddenly someone calls his name. Woo Jin-wook turns and is curious, wondering what they are talking about, and so he approaches the door to listen better. With a drop of sweat running down his face, he decides he should probably listen a little longer. On the other side of the door, he hears his colleague's voice saying it seems Jin-wook drank at lunch. That leaves Assemblyman Jo-seon Bong furious, and he yells that he should fire that psycho on the spot. But Lee Sang-ju calms him down, telling him not to do it yet, as he needs to maintain the image of being good to long-time employees. With a fake smile, the man suggests they just use him as a figurehead until the general election, and then replace him with someone else, which leaves Woo Jin-wook completely shocked upon hearing the betrayal.